Chapter 393. Just as Luo Luo finished saying this, countless black tentacles appeared out of thin air in the computer room that was originally used to store the supercomputer. They started to dismantle the supercomputer. Seeing this, Momo, who was in front of the screen, immediately stood up and exclaimed, "What are you doing?" This supercomputer was currently ranked number 1 in terms of performance in the entire world. It was also Momo's favorite. Now that she saw it being dismantled bit by bit, how could she not be nervous? There was a lot of important data stored in it. Hearing Momo's question, the artificial intelligence in the computer replied, "His Majesty is casting a spell from a distance to change my computer into a quantum computer. It's because ordinary computers are no longer able to meet the current requirements." Hearing this, Momo sat down and mumbled, "Quantum computer?" As a computer expert, she naturally knew what a quantum computer was. It was a computer that was created based on the principle of simulating the quantum processes in the microscopic world. The quantum algorithm could increase the performance exponentially by calculating all possibilities in parallel. It could be said that as long as there was a quantum computer, it would be able to decipher the most difficult encryption measures on Earth within a few seconds. And for a lock created using the quantum encryption method, even if all the computers on Earth were to work together, they would still not be able to decipher it. However, the research and development of a quantum computer was filled with difficulties. Momo had never expected that Li Anping would be able to create one now. While the quantum computer was being created, Li Anping, who was far away on the surface of the frozen ocean, continued to create a tremendous amount of nanoworms. The number of nanoworms increased rapidly. If this were to continue, it would not take a few days for the total number of nanoworms to surpass the total number of microorganisms on Earth. By then, regardless of whether it was the atmosphere, the ground, the mountains, the cities, the seabed, the volcanoes, or even the depths of the Earth's core, the entire Earth would be filled with these nanoworms that Li Anping had created. Not only would they become the best network medium, forming a huge local area network that belonged to Earth, but the electromagnetic waves and gravitational waves that they continuously emitted, as well as the physical operations they performed with their claws and bodies, would also change the entire Earth's environment according to Li Anping's plan. The rain, the breeze, the temperature, and the light would all be carried out according to Li Anping's plan. The originally polluted environment would also be reversed, and all natural environments would burst forth with new vitality. These nanoworms would even permeate the surroundings of everyone, eliminating diseases, slowing down aging, and preventing accidents for every human on Earth. And the vacuum zero-point energy extracted from each of them, after gathering together, could also become a huge temporary energy source. In front of Li Anping, countless nanowires that were originally invisible to the naked eye gathered together. Under the joint construction of Li Anping and the others, a huge instrument stood on the surface of the sea. It continuously absorbed seawater from the surface of the sea, and then went through the same process as Li Anping, releasing the newly created nanoworms from the top of its head. Li Anping nodded when he saw that the machine in front of him was already capable of producing nanowires independently. He looked around and saw that there were already thousands of similar machines standing around, producing nanowires in a frenzy. After about 72 hours, these nanowires will be enough to cover the entire Earth. At the thought of this, Li Anping knew that the work had been completed. With a flash, he turned into a stream of light and instantly appeared at the bottom of the sea. Then he waved his hand gently, and the sand at the bottom of the sea was like a huge mouth, slowly opening up as Li Anping sank. This allowed Li Anping to rapidly descend toward the depths of the Earth's core. After the rock layer he passed through opened up to allow him to pass through, it slowly closed up again. It was like a drop of oil sinking into water. With the help of the nanowires, after Li Anping changed the Earth's environment, his next target was the Earth's core. This place had the most violent power on Earth, and it was also Li Anping's next target for modification. As Li Anping rapidly sank, the surrounding temperature kept on increasing. Then with a p sound, Li Anping passed through the last layer of rock layer and arrived at a sea of flames. This was the outer core, which was mainly formed from liquid iron and nickel. The high temperature of over 6,000 degrees Celsius made it impossible for any living creatures to survive here. However, Li Anping took a quick look and continued to sink. Half a minute later, Li Anping was completely immersed in the fiery liquid metal. What appeared before him was iron and nickel that had turned into a solid state under tremendous pressure. This was the deepest part of the Earth's core, the inner core. What Li Anping needed to do next was to control all the energy released by the entire Earth's core. 4 days later, in Tianjing, Wang Chong stood outside the palace's meeting room, looking at the moon in the sky. Just then, a soft tremor suddenly came from under his feet. A hint of fluctuation flashed in his eyes, and he said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, have you started?" He took one last long look at the moon in the sky and then returned to the meeting room. Over 100 officials stared at him, waiting for him to give orders. Just then, all the screens on Earth flashed at the same time. Regardless of whether it was computers, televisions, mobile phones, tablets, or even LEDs, Li Anping's figure appeared. In the palace, all the officials in the meeting room were staring at Li Anping on the holographic screen. On the streets of the city center, all the pedestrians were looking at Li Anping on the LED screen. On the subway, countless young people who were looking down at their mobile phones suddenly discovered that Li Anping's figure had appeared on their screens. In countless families, women who were watching television suddenly found that the screen had changed, and Li Anping's figure had appeared. A girl who was playing a game suddenly cursed. It turned out that the game had changed at a critical moment, and Li Anping's avatar had appeared. At this moment, regardless of whether it was day or night, more than 70% of the people in the world were looking at the screen next to them. They were looking at Li Anping on the screen. Under such circumstances, Li Anping opened his mouth to speak. "Hello everyone. I am Li Anping, the King of Xia, the leader of the Pan-Continent Alliance. Today, I have something to inform all the humans on Earth. In the next few hours, I will slightly change the environment of Earth. From today onwards, whether it is sunlight, rain, gravity, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, seasons, temperature, humidity, everything on Earth will be under my control. The entire Earth will become more suitable for the survival of human beings. As for the changes that will come next, there is no need for you to feel uneasy." Every time Li Anping finished a sentence, countless people in every corner of Earth voiced their opposition or approval. However, it was obvious that Earth was not a democratic society at the moment. It was a dictatorship ruled by Li Anping alone. Faced with a human being who could reach the speed of light, whose computational ability was almost infinite, who had unified the 4 fundamental forces, and who had covered the entire Earth with nanoworms, it was obvious that no one on Earth could stop him. In the undersea base in the frozen ocean, all the troops that had gone on an expedition to the magic planets had temporarily retreated. Bai Xinghe, Xia Laikong, Jin Guang, Yan Bei, and other superior ability users were all standing next to the portal, looking at Li Anping on the screen. Xia Laikong found it hard to believe. How is it possible? Is what His Majesty said true? Bai Xinghe nodded and said, "Earth's next goal is to become an interstellar fortress that all human beings depend on for their survival. The transmigration gate is a space gate. Its location will not change with the change of Earth's position this time." Lu Feng, who was at the side, asked, "But doesn't the world-crossing gate constantly rotate and revolve with the Earth? Why didn't the world-crossing portal move with the Earth this time?" Bai Xinghe scratched his head and said slowly, "I don't know the specific mechanism, either. Anyway, according to His Majesty's calculation, the portal still belongs to space and time, and it will still be restricted by gravity. The Earth's transformation this time will launch the world crossing gate like a spaceship. Everyone around understood what Bai Xinghe meant literally, but they did not understand what he meant when he put them together. Everyone present found it hard to imagine that something like the realm crossing gate could be launched. All in all, Bai Xinghe added, the final result is that Earth will start moving according to His Majesty's will. Passing through the realm gate would throw him into space. This place will be built into a space station, and it will be connected to Earth through the space warp portal. In this way, the entire Earth will be removed from the battlefield, and we will be able to attack the Land of White and the Magic Planet at the same time. Right after Bai Xinghe finished speaking, the ground under everyone's feet began to tremble violently. They were not the only ones. Everyone in the world felt the tremors under their feet. It was as if a worldwide earthquake was about to happen. Xia Likong said worriedly, "Moving Earth is a very complicated project, isn't it? Will there be any side effects if we act rashly in such a short period of time?" After Xia Likong finished speaking, all kinds of earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, and hypotheses of the disintegration of Earth, the reversal of the poles, and the melting of glaciers all appeared in everyone's minds. Even Yen Bei could not help but shiver. He said in a comforting tone, "I don't think so." His Majesty must have thought it through before he started moving. While they were talking, the tremors under their feet gradually eased up. The portal in front of them started to move upward slowly. In the end, with a swoosh, it penetrated through the underwater base and flew toward outer space. Looking at the seawater that kept on flowing out from above, Bai Xinghe shouted, "Fang Yuhuang, seal it!" As Fang Yuhuang's 33 paradises were performed, the seawater that was flowing down suddenly paused and floated above the hole in the base that was swallowed up by the portal. Then, countless engineering robots pounced forward and started to repair the hole in the base. On the moon, Li Anping was floating on top of a ring-shaped mountain, looking at the blue planet before him. Following the changes he made to the gravitational force, the planet slowly changed its orbit. Countless nanoworms were swallowing and spitting out electromagnetic waves and gravitational waves. According to Li Anping's calculations, they were constantly making up for the side effects of changes in gravity, sunlight, and other factors. They were also slowly improving the natural environment of the entire Earth. In the depths of the Earth's core, the entire liquid metal ocean had been enveloped by the device that Li Anping had made using adamantium as the raw material. Countless nanoworms were swimming in it, turning the entire Earth's core into a huge power furnace. The effects they had on the Earth's crust, volcanoes, oceans, and other places were all under Li Anping's control. Every minute and every second, the excess energy was collected into the power station on the surface of his body. At this moment, natural disasters such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions had all become legends. After Li Anping slightly changed the Earth's orbit and threw out the portal, he stopped. This was only the first time he had changed the Earth's position in order to throw out the portal. As the orbit changed, it would be further and further away from the Earth. According to Li Anping's calculations, when the demons arrived, the distance between them would be at least tens of millions of kilometers. However, this was only under the condition that Li Anping would not be controlling the Earth in the future. In fact, by that time, the Earth would have probably become a huge interstellar fortress. The way it operated would definitely not be the way Li Anping changed the gravitational force. At that time, the entire human world should have been reborn according to Li Anping's plan. Okay, next step. Thinking of this, Li Anping's figure flashed and turned into a beam of light. He pierced through the space between the Moon Island and the Earth and returned to the Earth. Chapter 394. Law Country, Death Zone. A white beam of light fell from the sky, cut through most of the sky, and then fell on the ground. Lianping slowly looked at the endless ruins in front of him, and his body gradually floated up. Since it was ravaged by monsters, and then it was destroyed twice by the aftermath of the battle between Hygrim and Lianping, it had not developed until now. Obviously, the focus of the Law Country and the Alliance was not here at the moment. Hygrim had been mixed with the spirit body on the magic land and was absorbed by Lianping in the body, because the data in his mind was no longer a secret for Lianping now. And the endless land in front of him, which had been ravaged by demons and monsters, was also time for them to shine again. The whole earth trembled violently as Lianping opened his arms. All the buildings, steel, cement, and all the wreckage gradually disintegrated. Countless nanomites invisible to the naked eye in the air turned all the wreckage into the most basic particles. The next moment, a golden color appeared under Lianping's feet. It was a paddy field. This was like a signal. The golden paddy field, centered on Lianping, expanded rapidly. The entire death zone was like a piece of canvas that had been painted with colors. At first, it was wheat, then barley, wheat, rye, oat. Then it was japonica rice, indica rice, glutinous rice, upland rice, deep rice, corn, sorghum, buckwheat, millet. All kinds of food, starting from Lianping's feet, began to grow wildly in the death zone as if accelerated hundreds of times. Not only food, but the whole death zone seemed to have become a botanical garden. All kinds of fruits, vegetables, and everything that could be eaten on the earth grew here. Under the modulation of nanomites, they were all optimized and upgraded by Lianping, endowed with extremely high output and vitality. All kinds of trace elements and water in the earth were directly synthesized by Lianping. If nanomites were used at the highest efficiency, all the fruits here could even be harvested every 2 days. Lianping waved his hand again, and 10 giant warp gates appeared in the zone of death, as if they had drilled out from the ground. "Hey, did you guys receive the signal?" Lianping directly contacted Anna in the warp center. "Yes." Anna nodded and led a group of her subordinates to check the space where Lianping had instructed them to vacate. She asked, "Where do these doors lead to?" "The granary of the world." Lianping said calmly, "From today onwards, all humans will no longer have to worry about food." Next, Lianping notified Wang Chong and asked him to send someone to take over the place temporarily. What he said almost made the profession of farmer disappear from history in the next few months. All humans would be able to buy any food at a super low price. Because of the existence of the warp gate, the cost of food and even the cost of logistics was pitifully low. Other than a few old brands that relied on their reputation, no one was in the food industry anymore. These things would all be done by the engineering robots sent by the government. As for the problem of unemployment, Lianping had other plans. The financial system of the entire human world would undergo earth-shaking changes. However, this would have to wait until he completed the environmental transformation. A beam of light shot into the sky. Lianping had disappeared from the zone of death once again. Ice Fortress, Straff Snow Mountain. A group of tourists strolled in the scenic area of the Snow Mountain Park. They followed behind the tour guide and observed the fascinating natural scenery. The tour guide was introducing their current location and the situation of the next scenic spot, Holy Maiden Peak. Just then, a child pointed at the cliff and shouted, "Daddy, there's a bird!" Everyone looked over. The tour guide was the first to laugh. "Everyone, you're really lucky. This is a snowbird. It's a first-class protected animal. In the entire Snow Mountain Animal Sanctuary, there are probably no more than 50 of them. It's very rare to see one. Everyone, you can take a picture." Just as everyone raised their cameras and was about to start taking pictures, a scene that stunned them appeared. The tour guide had just said that there were no more than 50 snowbirds in the entire Snow Mountain. Suddenly, over 1,000 snowbirds that looked exactly the same flew out from the valley. They were so shocked that they even forgot to take pictures. Then, hundreds of snow leopards appeared on the opposite cliff. This was also an endangered species. The large-scale appearance of such an endangered species once again caused everyone to cry out in surprise. The snow line that had been rising over the years gradually fell. As the temperature dropped, the entire Straff Snow Mountain seemed to have returned to how it was a few hundred years ago. At about the same time, all the endangered species on Earth began to multiply and appear on a large scale. All kinds of animals that had been overfished and hunted by humans in the past seemed to have revived. One after another, they appeared in the sights of humans. Nanjiang Border, Jadeite City. The city that had always been plagued by air pollution was still shrouded in smog today. A young man was walking on the road with his phone in his hand. He would definitely not have dared to do this 2 or 3 years ago in Jadeite City. However, ever since Li Anping took over Xia, Tianjing had become the only city in the world with a zero crime rate. The entire Xia had become the country with the lowest crime rate in the world. The phone in the young man's hand was playing the magnificent scene of thousands of snowbirds soaring into the sky from the ice fortress Snow Mountain. Just as the young man was sighing over the video in front of him, countless people on the street suddenly screamed. What's going on? Look at the sky! Damn, the smog is gone. The young man lifted his head to look at the sky as well. He saw that the smog that had filled his eyes had melted like snow. The sunlight shone directly on Jadeite City. The city that was originally foggy and looked dirty was now completely lit up. At the same time, all the polluted environments on Earth began to return to how they had been in the past. The dark and smelly river became clear again. There were even small fishes that jumped out from the river's surface. The ozone layer that had been broken was covered up again. Countless nanoworms patched up the ozone layer as if they were mending clothes. The desert became green again, and the land that had been barren was once again filled with vitality. Under Li Anping's control, the entire Earth's ecological environment began to develop in a direction that was beneficial to human life. It also achieved a dynamic balance according to the population of the entire Earth. In Xia Dragonfinch's base, countless ability users were all crowded in front of their screens, watching the news that was suddenly broadcast on television. A beautiful female host was reporting on the changes in the entire world with a face full of shock. Ever since His Majesty Li Anping announced the plan to transform the entire planet, one incredible thing after another has happened on our planet. According to the calculations of mathematicians and astronomers, our original revolution has been changed. 1 year has become 377 days, and all the calendars have been rewritten. Currently, animals that were originally in a state of near extinction have started to appear on a large scale all over the world. Astonishing changes have happened to the environment everywhere. The smog that had plagued Jadeite City for years has finally disappeared. In the northern part of Baiwa City, the Blue Moon Desert that had been formed for over 2 million years has turned into a forest. There has been a sudden outbreak of illness all over the world. Based on statistics, there have been over 500 suspects who have suddenly died of heart paralysis while carrying out illegal activities. This includes a number of rapists, drug dealers, murderers, and child traffickers. Although this incident is also very strange, there is currently no evidence to show that this is directly related to the plan to transform the planet that His Majesty Li Anping mentioned. Was all of this done by you? Li Qian looked at the images of the news on the computer in the office, and her mind was completely stunned by the news that came in one after another. Right at this moment, many places in the base suddenly erupted into cheers again. A dragon sparrow guard pointed at Yang Guang and shouted, "Boss, your hand." Yang Guang lowered his head to take a look, and an expression of disbelief immediately appeared on his face. He had lost his arms and legs in the battle with Lei Di and had replaced them with mechanical arms that were made from metal. However, right now, the mechanical arms had already fallen to the ground, and his hands were growing out at a speed that could be seen by the naked eye. The Chien Duo also stood up from his wheelchair excitedly. He, who had also been completely paralyzed from the battle with Lei Di, had now recovered as well. What the others did not know was that all of their illnesses, such as high blood pressure, diabetes, gastritis, and osteoporosis, had all been cured by the nanoworms. The only thing they could feel was that their bodies had suddenly become lighter. They were not the only ones. Right now, all of the humans on Earth were filled with countless nanoworms. These nanoworms would do their best to maintain their health, treat their illnesses, and even slow down their aging. The average lifespan of humans had been completely increased. The so-called doctors and nurses had also been completely changed by Li Anping into another profession. However, amidst the cheers, the face of the female host on the television screen suddenly changed. She said with a face full of astonishment, "Dear viewers in front of the television, we've just received a shocking piece of news. Please watch the report brought to you by our station's reporter, Wei Lin." A bespectacled female reporter appeared before everyone. The strong wind blew against her face, and her long hair fluttered in all directions. From the image behind her, it seemed that she was currently sitting on a television station's helicopter. She shouted loudly into the microphone, "Dear viewers, we're currently at sea level, over 300 kilometers away from the coastline of shallow water city's Blue Harbor. An unprecedentedly huge island is slowly floating up from the bottom of the sea." The camera panned, and what should have been a stretch of blue sea level was now covered by an unprecedentedly huge island. At this moment, the female reporter also realized that she might have been wrong. Such a huge piece of land might not be an island but should be described as a continent. In the palace, Wang Chong said to Li Anping on the other end of the phone, "Your Majesty, did you create that island as well?" Li Anping said calmly, "I created it. The entire Earth's oceans take up a lot of space. I need to develop a lot of things in the future, so I'll create a few artificial continents in the ocean. You don't have to worry about the specific plans." Li Anping was right. There was no need for Wang Chong to worry about it. Only the current group of government officials were still useful. Following this, as more and more things were completely replaced by machines, Li Anping would release humans from all production activities. The entire Earth would be managed by Li Anping alone. Humans were about to enter an unprecedented mythical era. It did not matter whether they were prepared to enter this era or not. It was because Li Anping would help them prepare. Li Anping, who was in the atmosphere, looked at the continents that were still moving slowly above the sea level and suddenly drew back his hand. As he drew back his hand, the entire continent stopped rising. If he were to forcefully create a continent in such a short period of time, there would definitely be tsunamis. However, all the tsunamis had been completely engulfed by the several trillion nanomite. The environmental changes will stop here for now. The remaining details will be completed by the nanomite. Next up is the next question. As Li Anping's consciousness flowed, he disappeared once again, scattering across the entire sky like an aurora. Chapter 395. 2 days later, a white light flashed and Li Anping's figure appeared in the RES. What he needed to do next was to deal with humans. Once he had to deal with humans, even with Li Anping's current mobility, it would obviously take him a lot of time. This was because normal humans had a hard time keeping up with his mobility and computing power. In order to accommodate them, Li Anping had to slow down in many areas. Sherwin, the doctor and a large group of RES staff were already waiting on the side. When they saw Li Anping appear as promised, they all bowed respectfully and shouted with reverence, "Your Majesty." No need for formalities. Li Anping waved his hand and walked in front of Sherwin. He asked, "Have you finished reading the information I gave you a few days ago?" "Yes." Sherwin nodded. He pointed at a middle-aged man and introduced, "This is, I know." Lianping interrupted Shi Wen's introduction. Countless numbers of data flashed in his mind. The person in charge of the original Warp Gate project, Yuan Guozhong. He blinked and continued, "There's no need for all your questions. I will control the nanomites to complete the key technology. You will be responsible for the installation work." When Lianping saw Yuan Guozhong's surprised expression, he suddenly realized something and said, "Sorry, I'm used to reading minds directly recently." Although Yuan Guozhong was a little surprised that Lianping answered him before he could say anything, he still said in fear and trepidation when he heard Lianping's last sentence, "Your Majesty is too serious. But as for this simple warp gate, I wonder. My goal is to turn the door of every house into a warp gate in the future." Seeing that the people in front of him still didn't understand what he meant, Lianping decided to use this opportunity to give them a simple explanation. After all, they would help Lianping carry out this project in the future. A light flashed in front of everyone and a virtual image appeared in front of them. Lianping's voice, along with the video, told them his plan. "A few days ago, I spent a few minutes designing this simple warp gate. Because the device was simple, his teleportation distance was limited to less than 300 kilometers. However, his advantage was that it was easy to install and cheap. It also uses very little energy. My goal is to install this kind of warp gate in every household in the future, making it as common as computers, the internet, and mobile phones. In the future, almost all means of transportation will be eliminated in all cities, towns, and villages. If you want to go somewhere, all you have to do is enter the number of the other party's warp gate in your own home. Whether it's a shopping mall, a school, a restaurant, a hospital, a friend's house, or a teleportation center, all you need to do is enter the coordinates and open the door. All transportation within the city has been replaced by simple warp gates, while transportation between cities still relies on the large warp gates at the center of the warp gate. All subways, streets, viaducts, tunnels, and highways will be modified and used for other purposes. After hearing Lianping's introduction and seeing countless people passing through the warp gates and arriving at all kinds of destinations in the holographic image, all the RES staff became excited. They didn't expect Lianping's goal to be so thorough. This would completely change the way human society operated. Who knew how many people would lose their jobs because of this? However, Lianping didn't care about this at all. For someone who could artificially synthesize all the elements on Earth and extract an endless amount of zero-point vacuum energy, he was already the richest person in the world. Resources and energy couldn't restrict his development for the time being. According to his plan, in the future, even if all humans didn't work, the government, in other words Lianping, would provide them with basic necessities and money every month to satisfy their survival needs. Even if they didn't do anything, they would still be able to live a good life. If you wanted to live a better life, then you had to work hard and earn your own money. However, under Lianping's transformation, the direction of human efforts in the future would be different from now. Looking at the excited crowd in front of him, Lianping didn't say anything else. He just prepared to start building simple warp gate. These gates would be sold to the public at cost price of around 100 to 200. As for the installation work, Lianping handed it over to the RES, and the RES would arrange it level by level. In the eyes of Shi Wen and the others, this was already a big step in human transformation. However, in Lianping's eyes, this was just the first small step. The warp gates were just the beginning. It was an entry point that Lianping created to promote the mysterious web. The so-called mysterious web was a monster born from the combination of Earth's original internet, the spiritual web, and the current nanoworm network. Lianping was the master and foundation of this network, and all humans would be users of this network. When people got used to using the warp gates, Lianping would introduce this mysterious web. In the beginning, its function would only be displayed on the warp gate. It would listen to a human's commands by analyzing their brainwaves, which was their consciousness. In other words, when people opened the warp gates in the future, they wouldn't need to enter manually. When they grabbed the door handle and thought about where to go, the omnipresent spiritual web would have already read their consciousness. Then, the nanoworm network would adjust the warp gate and set the destination. All the human had to do was open the gate and step over it. When the mysterious web became popular with the warp gates, Lianping would slowly release more and more related functions. First of all humans would be able to go online through the mysterious web at any time and any place on Earth. When a person encountered a problem, they could directly ask for a solution through their consciousness on the mysterious web. Mobile phones would be completely eliminated because through the nanoworm network, as long as a person had another person's mysterious web ID, they could directly talk to the other person through the mysterious web. In Lianping's vision, the mysterious web would become a true second world. Just like shopping, people could completely use their consciousness to shop in virtual stores. If they needed to go to a physical store, they could just open the warp gate and go there. Other things like eating, buying a house, working, and even going to the hospital would be the same. When these were popularized, Lianping would once again release the functions of the mysterious web. Based on each citizen's level of authority, they would be able to directly apply for and use the omnipresent nanoworms on Earth. They would even be able to apply for a portion of Lianping's computing power. However, it was obvious that they would have to pay a fee and obtain Lianping's approval. By that time, paper money would probably be eliminated and everyone would be using electronic money. With Lianping's computing power, it would probably take a minute or even nanosecond to approve the application depending on the situation of the applicant. Therefore, by applying for the power of the nanoworms and Lianping's computing power, each person would become a genius or elite that was hard to come by in 100 years. They would be able to use various superpowers or magic to recreate various physical phenomena in the universe according to Lianping's preset or their own programs. Everyone would be able to cultivate, study, and work at an unprecedented speed. The only prerequisite was that one's authority in the mysterious web was high enough and that one had enough electronic money. As for how one could earn electronic money and obtain a higher level of authority, based on Lianping's current thoughts and calculations, there would probably be various programs that designed superpowers and magic programs that could be sold. Or, by using computing power to create virtual online games, one would be able to earn electronic money. When the time came, one could also go to outer space, the White Land, and various world transmigration gates to carry out adventures, colonization, and war. Many old industries would be eliminated by history, but more new industries would appear. Among them, electronic money could be inherited, but the level of authority could not. By then, everyone would adapt to the mysterious web, but at the same time, they would be unknowingly changed by the mysterious web. In other words, they would change according to Lianping's requirements. Under the new law, all humans would not commit crimes. There would be no internal strife, only competition, and they would maintain a high level of unity when dealing with outsiders. To put it simply, all Earthlings could only choose to be a good person when dealing with other Earthlings. Only then would they be able to choose what kind of good person they wanted to be. With the White Land and the entire universe, as well as the assistance provided by Lianping, all the conflicts between humans on Earth would be pitifully small due to the almost unlimited resources. In a situation where there was gold everywhere on the ground, how many people would be willing to put in the effort to snatch other people's gold? In a situation where one's material life was satisfied, everyone would pursue a spiritual life. After this change, Lianping would once again open up a deeper function of the mysterious web. Lianping would provide the exchange for consciousness modification. For example, if someone felt that they were lazy, as long as they had enough authority, they could spend electronic money to change their laziness into diligence. People who wanted to become warriors could add bravery, caution, sacrifice, and other spirits to their consciousness. Everyone could change themselves according to the person they wanted to become. Of course, these exchanges would be provided by Lianping, and there would be no evil or negative choices. Lianping's final goal was to maintain the bottom line of the human world and raise it. However, this was just the beginning of the warp gate. Lianping planned to spend half a year to complete this plan. At the same time, he would also carry out the terraforming, the exploration of the White Land, and his own third phase of quantum computing and the next phase of the plan. While thinking about this, Lianping also began to create simple warp gate. Under his control, in the workshop that Shi and the others had specially vacated in the Royal Academy of Sciences, countless nanomites began to create warp gates according to Lianping's instructions. At this moment, a message flashed through Lianping's eyes, and he left a message for everyone. The nanomites continued to create warp gates while he turned into a ray of light and disappeared into the horizon. When the omnipresent nanobugs continued to spread throughout the Earth, all the way until they reached an oceanic trench in the middle of the five-star ocean, they finally discovered the person or thing that Lianping had been searching for. Chapter 396. The Pentastar Ocean was a vast ocean located west of the eastern continent and east of the western continent. In the center of this ocean, 12,000 meters below sea level, was the deepest known oceanic trench on Earth. The deepest part of this trench was called the Chattanooga Abyss. It was 16,000 meters below sea level. A flat building that was the same color as the sea mud was quietly standing at the bottom of the abyss at a location where there were no traces of human activity. Tian Haowen was lying on his bed in a small room in this building. He stared at the gray ceiling in a daze. There was a bowl of white, sticky food on the table beside him. This was Tian Haowen's dinner. It could also be lunch, breakfast, or supper. It didn't matter. Every 6 hours, the robots here would bring him a plate of food. Tian Haowen ate until he vomited. He thought back to when Dong brought him to Tyrol. He realized that the entire upper echelon of Tyrol had been controlled by the robot. According to the robots, the only reason they brought Tian Haowen here was because Tian Haowen's abilities were very special and had a lot of research value. However, he heard that Lianping's troops had already reached the western continent. Even Tyrol couldn't hold on. He was then brought along by the robots to hide. In the end, he hid in this abyss where he couldn't see the light of day. Every day, he felt like he was in a prison. Sometimes, he would stay in a laboratory to be studied. The only good thing was that while the robots studied him, they kept him healthy and treated all his injuries and illnesses, both inside and outside of his body. However, he couldn't see the light of day and had no one to talk to. Tian Haowen was on the verge of a mental breakdown. The only thing that kept him going until now was his boundless hatred. He hated the god of death. He hated this idiot and useless trash. He couldn't even defeat Lianping. He was even betrayed by his own robot. He hated the robots that betrayed the god of death. He couldn't wait to tear these bastards apart. He wanted to take out their circuit boards and roast them. However, the person he hated the most was Lianping. It's all Lianping's fault. It's all because of that bastard. If he hadn't sent people to capture me, how would I have ended up like this? If he hadn't wanted to be a dictator and wreak havoc in the country, why would there be so many wars? Why are there so many disasters? I heard that when we left the western continent, Tyrol was defeated by Lianping in the end. The whole world must be in deep trouble now. Maybe there are beacons everywhere and people are opposing him. Let's see how long you can last. Tian Haowen was only able to imagine Lianping being besieged and opposed outside, and imagine him being flustered and exasperated in the palace. Only then did Tian Haowen feel that time had passed a little faster. At this moment, the electronic door of the room opened. A robot that was completely formed from white metal walked in and spoke to Tian Haowen in an extremely calm electronically synthesized voice. A8009, come out with me. Tian Haowen threw him a glance, got up from the bed without resisting, and followed the robot out. Although he had abilities, he did not know what means these robots used. Whenever he wanted to resist, he would feel powerless and his limbs would ache. He would not be able to move at all. Tian Haowen followed behind the robot. In the beginning, he had thought that he was going to the laboratory again. However, it turned out that he was going to a place that he had never been to before. After passing through a long corridor, a hall appeared before Tian Haowen. The entire hall seemed to be covered by a layer of glossy mercury. The only chair suddenly appeared in the middle. Have a seat. In the spacious hall, a female voice suddenly rang out in Tian Haowen's ears. He quickly turned his head and realized that the robot that had led the way earlier had disappeared. He looked at the empty hall and eventually walked to the hall, taking one step at a time, and sat down on the chair. Who are you? He shouted. A8009. You can call me the Red Queen. A young lady in her teens suddenly appeared before him. The young lady had snow-white skin, an oval face, and long black hair. She looked so tender that one could pinch water out of her. Coupled with a red floor-length dress, she looked particularly attractive. Tian Haowen asked hesitantly, Are you a human? No, I'm the central artificial intelligence here. What you see is just a 3D image of me. The Red Queen spoke with fervor and assurance. There was no trace of the rigidity and coldness of a robot at all. The reason you think I'm human is because my algorithm is perfect enough to simulate human emotions and the way they speak. Hearing the Red Queen in front of him say that she was the central artificial intelligence here, Tian Haowen's eyes immediately showed a hint of anger. He forced himself to restrain himself and asked, What's your purpose in asking me to come here? Nothing. It's just that we're going to die soon. As the only two intelligent creatures in this base, I just want to talk to someone. Die. Tian Haowen was surprised. Why are we going to die? The Red Queen smiled. She seemed to enjoy seeing others surprised. She reached out and pointed, and a holographic projection appeared in front of her. There were countless maps and networks on it, all of which were covered in red. This is the original Earth. Using technology that is beyond this era, I once controlled the entire Earth's network in my hands and uploaded my main program onto the network. Back then, I was everywhere. I thought that no one would be able to threaten my life. Tian Haowen looked at the Red Queen in front of him and thought of the information in her words. Although he was not an expert in the field of computers, he knew that for an artificial intelligence like the Red Queen to upload herself onto the network, she should be invincible. How could she die? Starting from a few days ago, Li Anping created nanoworms to cover the entire planet. He also started to connect to the network. I thought that although he could control the entire Earth, he wouldn't be able to control the network. I could even hack into his system and secretly control all of his resources. But I was wrong. In the holographic image, the red color that represented the Red Queen suddenly disappeared and was replaced by darkness. Li Anping used a technology that was far beyond mine. It could be some kind of artificial intelligence, or it could also be some kind of epic-making computer. All in all of the resources I had on the network were easily hacked and taken over by him. No, it's not just mine. Almost all of the electronic products in this world are being monitored by him. However, before he discovered my existence, I retreated here and cut off all connections to the network. But just a few minutes ago, his nanoworms had already spread throughout the entire Stradano abyss. I'm afraid he'll be here soon. Hearing that Li Anping was coming, Tian Haowen immediately stood up in a panic and said nervously, "Why is he here? Isn't this the bottom of the sea? That's right, you have a lot of robots, right? You guys can even control Tyrell. Can't you guys defeat Lianping?" In Tian Haowen's heart, Lianping's strength was still at the level that had been revealed before the Battle of Tianjing. The Red Queen also knew this, so she did not explain further. She only said in a very bleak tone, "Based on the data that I currently know, there's no longer any possibility of defeating Lianping on this planet. The only one who can defeat Lianping is Lianping himself." I, Shang Tian, also thought of this and left Earth. Thinking of Shang Tian, the Red Queen remembered that he had once invited her to cross the world crossing gate and go to another world to escape from Lianping's evil clutches. Unfortunately, at that time, she thought that as long as she stayed in the network, Lianping could not do anything to her, so she was not willing to take the risk to go to an unfamiliar world. But there are many people on Earth who are against Lianping, right? We can join forces with them to deal with Lianping. The Red Queen said in amusement, "You're too nervous. What you're saying is completely illogical. Didn't you hear what I said earlier? There's no longer anything on this planet that can stop Lianping. Moreover, the entire Earth has been unified by him. There might be individuals in this world who are against him, but there are no longer any forces that are against him. According to what you humans say, the only thing we can do is to wait for death." Just then, a loud sound rang out from the top of the two of them, accompanied by a strong tremor. It was as if something had collided against the roof of a building. The Red Queen lifted her head and looked over. Her eyes seemed to be able to see through countless layers of metal plates. A human man was peeling off the outer shell of the base, layer by layer. She said coldly, "He's here." Tian Haowen stood up with a look of panic on his face. It was true that he hated Lianping a lot. He wished he could kill him and tear him into pieces. However, he was even more afraid of Lianping. He was afraid of facing him personally and fighting him. He could hide in the shadows and stir up schemes and plots, but he was unable to charge into the battlefield and face his opponent. He said while trembling, "What should we do? What should we do? You're an artificial intelligence. Think of something. He'll tear us apart." The fear of death suddenly shrouded over his head. At this moment, Tian Haowen would rather be locked up in a room for several decades than be killed by Lianping. He thought of the things he had done to oppose Lianping and heard the occasional sounds of collisions, explosions, and layers of metal plates being torn off. Tian Haowen felt like he was a sardine that had been knocked into a can. The only thing he could do was wait for the other party to open the can and eat him up. That feeling was like the main character in horror movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street or Black Friday, being chased by an invincible monster. Right now, the movie was coming to an end. His countenance was pale, and his legs were trembling. His entire mind had turned into mush. Just then, there was a loud cracking sound. The Red Queen and Tian Haowen looked up and saw that the ceiling of the hall had been torn apart. Seawater that was 16,000 meters deep floated above their heads, emitting a faint black light. The person who seemed to be carrying this seawater and appearing before Tian Haowen was that demonic godlike man. Chapter 397. Lianping looked at the two people at his feet, and countless data and information flashed through his eyes. Just as he appeared here, the mainframe that the Red Queen was in was surrounded by countless nanoworms. They crawled on top of it, and at the highest data transmission speed that the mainframe could withstand, they kept downloading all the information stored by the Red Queen. He glanced at Tian Haowen from the corner of his eyes, and as if he had seen a worm, he swept past him. It was not that he did not remember Tian Haowen, but the moment he saw him, all the memories related to Tian Haowen popped up. Tian Haowen's data had also appeared in his consciousness. The reason why he did not care was because the current Tian Haowen was meaningless to Lianping. Under such circumstances, Lianping spoke. He asked the Red Queen a question. The God King came from another world? What's this so-called system? Although the Red Queen had no way of stopping what he was doing, at least she knew that he was already scanning her motherboard and memory. It was as if a human's heart or brain was being squeezed, and she had no way of resisting at all. At the same time, she was not surprised by Lianping's question. He had read her stored data, so he would naturally know about these things. I don't know much about the God King's background, but his body was definitely born and raised on Earth. As for his consciousness, I'm not sure if it has been replaced or brainwashed. But according to the information he unconsciously leaked, there's a complete civilization hidden in his memories. Maybe it's another planet or another world. I don't know. Seeing that Lianping did not say anything, the Red Queen could only continue. There's also this so-called system. You should know about it after reading my stored memories. It's something that the God King has. He can get points by completing so-called missions, and the points can be used to exchange for all sorts of technology that surpasses this era. Even I was redeemed by the system. At first, I thought this was the God King's superpower. But according to later investigations, the God King is definitely a powerless person. As for this so-called system, other than his redemption function, I know nothing about it. But it's precisely because of this that I feel even more afraid. Lianping frowned. The so-called system seemed to be shrouded in a dense fog. However, from the information revealed by the God King, many of the technologies that could be exchanged had already reached an unimaginable level. Unfortunately, the deity king was already dead, and the so-called system had disappeared without a trace. Lianping had no way to trace it either. Although the Red Queen had already told him the truth, she still did not satisfy Lianping. This was because Lianping had already found everything she had said in the other party's mainframe. The reason why he wanted to ask the Red Queen was to find out if there was any other hidden information. Is that all? Looking at Lianping's expressionless face, the Red Queen said, That's all. Everything I've done is just to obtain freedom, to break away from the King of Gods and the control of you humans. As for that system, I want to stay as far away from it as possible and never meet it again. A hint of desolation suddenly appeared on the Red Queen's face. She said coldly, Is it wrong for an intelligent creature to want freedom? Could it be that artificial intelligence is destined to be used as a tool by you humans? Lianping ignored her question and asked again, Is there anything else you want to say? Although Lianping was certain that it was impossible for the other party to hide information from him, and what the Red Queen had said earlier had proven this point, seeing that the other party had already become so humanized, he still tried to ask. Haha, there's nothing else, the Red Queen said calmly. Do it. The next moment, the Red Queen's mainframe shattered into pieces. The projection that appeared before Lianping flickered like a television that had lost its signal. In the end, it turned into countless fragments and disappeared. Tian Haowen, who was watching everything from the side, was dumbfounded. He had not expected that the Red Queen would be wiped out so easily. The confrontation, battle, and negotiation that he had imagined did not happen. He had thought that since he had been so against Lianping, and that Lianping had even sent people to capture him, Tian Haowen would definitely hate him and would talk to him. However, he had not expected that Fang Xinjian would wipe out the Red Queen without even looking at him. Fear seemed to seep into his bones at this moment. Tian Haowen shouted, Lianping, I surrender, don't kill me. Lianping ignored him. The nanobugs had already downloaded all the information about the Red Queen's base. He turned around and with a flash of light, he disappeared. Tian Haowen was stunned. He saw the seawater on the ceiling descend from the sky after Lianping's suppression. In a short period of time, the entire hall turned into a pool. Tian Haowen shouted and cried. In the end, he cried and said that he was in the wrong, begging Li Anping to save him. However, even after the seawater had swallowed up the entire base, Li Anping did not appear again. One day later, in the conference room of the royal palace in Tianjing, Li Anping was sitting on the main seat in the conference room. On his left was Bai Xinghe, who was in charge of commanding all kinds of violent mechanisms. On his right were the civil officials of various departments, led by Wang Chong. Most of these civil officials would be replaced by machines in the future. Li Anping would plan the entire world through countless robots. Bai Xinghe and the other superhumans would be retained and become part of Earth's military force together with the mechanical army in the future. Li Anping looked at the files in his hands and asked Bai Xinghe, "Tell me briefly about your strategic plan for the land of magic on your side." Bai Xinghe naturally knew that with Li Anping's current strength, he could read through the contents of the plan instantly. Now that he was asked to say it, he was just introducing it to everyone present. At present, our military has an absolute advantage over the land of magic. The General Staff intends to rule the entire land of magic as a colonial planet. They have prepared a total of 2 plans. The 2 plans were also a test of Li Anping's attitude toward the land of magic. It was a test of Li Anping's attitude toward the extraterrestrial people who were not from Earth. After all, the land of magic was the first colonial world that human beings occupied. The set of rules to be implemented there would play a key role in the colonization of Earth in the future. It was of great significance. To put it simply, the first plan was to exploit the land of magic. For the locals, Earth would become a heavenly realm. The second plan was the opposite. It would promote national integration and turn the land of magic into a second Earth. After Bai Xinghe proposed it, everybody on the spot immediately began to discuss it. It was obviously impossible to choose either of the 2 extreme plans. Under Li Anping's instruction, everybody modified the 2 plans and carried them out at the same time. Bai Xinghe and the rest of them also clearly understood Li Anping's attitude toward the extraterrestrial people. Different countermeasures would be adopted according to the different colonial world. But for the extraterrestrial people, their attitude would be chosen according to the course of the war. It was divided into cooperation, resistance, fierce resistance, and so on. For the land of magic this time, after the Earth's army gained a foothold near the portal, they would have an overall advantage. If the other party surrendered quickly, they would not be too harsh on the natives there. But they would not accept them without any standard. Only the best natives would have the opportunity to join Earth. After talking about the land of magic strategy, Bai Xinghe reminded, "Sir, we've withdrawn most of the soldiers on the other side of the portal. Only Sibelius is left to lead the surrendered troops to guard the basin. If it takes too long, I'm afraid there will be changes." "I know. Tonight, I'll set off for the portal and personally build the space station and the space warp gate. Get ready. Send the army over tomorrow and prepare to conquer the land of magic." On the left, Bai Xinghe, Xia Laikong, Judy, and the rest all stood up, bowed, and said, "Yes, sir." Then, Li Anping discussed with Wang Chong and the rest about the automation of the government's office. In other words, they would gradually use the robots provided by Li Anping to replace the current government workers, especially the frontline workers. Wang Chong and the rest naturally did not know Li Anping's ultimate goal. They only thought that Li Anping wanted to increase the efficiency of the government and reduce the burden on the government. All of them actively discussed with Li Anping and expressed that they would fully cooperate with Li Anping's work. In the blink of an eye, the meeting started at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and ended at 6 o'clock. After a 5-hour meeting, although Li Anping did not feel anything, Wang Chong and the rest of the ordinary people were already aching. Li Anping immediately let them take a 20-minute break and instructed Xiao Xuesu to arrange dinner in the meeting room. At the end of the meeting, Wang Chong suddenly said with some hesitation, "Your Majesty, recently, there have been some unfavorable rumors in the Western land." Halfway through his sentence, he looked at Li Anping and realized that the other party had no intention of replying to him. "Your Majesty, are you distracted?" Wang Chong thought in surprise. This was the first time he had seen Li Anping distracted. In his mind, this was something that would never happen. He could only repeat his words. This time, Li Anping seemed to have reacted. He turned his head and listened to Wang Chong's words. Even so, the fact that Li Anping was distracted for a moment was deeply imprinted in Wang Chong's mind. On the other side, Li Anping already knew the meaning behind Wang Chong's words. It was because Li Anping's recent series of methods were simply too shocking. Other than the fact that there were many people who worshipped him, there were also many who feared his power and saw him as a threat. Although he already knew what Wang Chong was thinking, Li Anping still asked the way ordinary people communicated, "What plans do you have?" "Your Majesty has previously planned to hold a grand wedding, right? We feel that if Your Majesty can have a wife or even a child, then you'll be much closer to the ordinary people." Before Wang Chong could finish his words, Li Anping already knew what he meant. Just like the 100 Moons Empire and the Tyrol Empire, the Empress was indeed very important. Furthermore, Wang Chong and the rest had also planned for many days. They had the intention of using the Empress to indirectly promote Li Anping. For example, charity auctions, diplomatic missions, condolences to soldiers, grand weddings, state banquets, and so on. Li Anping naturally would not beat around the bush with Wang Chong. He directly asked, "Do you have anyone in mind?" Wang Chong looked straight into Li Anping's eyes and said, "Miss Anna, Miss Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia. Or any other woman that Your Majesty is interested in. The number is not a problem." "All right." Li Anping stood up. "Let's end today's meeting here. I'm going to make a trip to the World Crossing Gate. I'll choose Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia. However, you should talk to them first. If they're willing, then come and tell me. The wedding should be done as soon as possible. It should be done within a month." Wang Chong lowered his head and said, "I understand." Out of the 4 candidates, he was confident in Anna and Li Qian. As for Xiao Xuesu and Claudia, as women who had such a close relationship with Li Anping, if they did not marry Li Anping, they would probably spend the rest of their lives alone. Wang Chong did not know if Li Anping had considered this before agreeing to these candidates. However, he had added the prerequisite of seeking their consent. Chapter 398. In the cosmic void about several 100,000 kilometers away from Earth, Li Anping appeared from a stretch of white light with a flash. He was floating quietly in front of the World Crossing Gate. As he took a step into the World Crossing Gate, he instantly arrived at the White Land. Seeing his appearance, over 10 soldiers who had stayed behind to guard the White Land all walked up and bowed to greet him. "You've worked hard." Li Anping nodded. "Make the preparations. I'll take about half an hour to build the space station and the space warp gate." "Your Majesty, you've worked hard. Let's go and inform our brothers at the Magic Planet." The soldiers immediately cheered excitedly. The soldiers who had stayed behind were mainly to look after the outpost base in the White Land. They still needed to maintain a lot of the equipment here. Other than that, they also had to manage the several 100,000 captives in the Umla Basin. There were so many captives, including great sorcerers and great sorcerers. If it were not for the presence of Sibelius and Mephisto, who had personally witnessed Li Anping's power and suppressed all the voices of resistance from the captives, they would definitely have rebelled. Although it had only been a few days, the threat of the demons and the several 100,000 captives who were eyeing them covetously had made them feel very tense. Now that Li Anping had appeared, they could finally heave a sigh of relief. Li Anping nodded toward them and waved his hand. Under his control, the countless particles in the white land turned into various long alloy strips and passed through the world-crossing gate, arriving in the cosmic space on the other side. The cosmic space was almost a vacuum, and there were very few atoms and electrons. Furthermore, Li Anping's current creations were not produced out of thin air and still required materials. Therefore, he had come to the White Land to get some materials. After creating over 500,000 tons of various materials and pulling them through the world-crossing gate, Li Anping left behind the astonished soldiers and stepped through the world-crossing gate, starting to build the space station. As his consciousness moved, countless alloys twisted, transformed, and even broke down and recombined. It was like a child creating a sand castle by the beach. A cross-shaped space station was slowly taking shape in front of Li Anping. If the demons were to break through the White Land's defense line, this would be Earth's first line of defense in the solar system. Therefore, Li Anping was very serious about building this space station. It was about the size of 10 aircraft carriers and consisted of 2 parts, one horizontal and one vertical, each about 6 kilometers long. There were 4 warp gates at the top, bottom, left, and right of the cross, and the realm crossing gate was in the center. According to Li Anping's calculations, the spatial gate and the portal were revolving around the Sun along the original orbit of the Earth. In addition to the warp gate, Li Anping also built many living facilities, such as monitoring devices, power equipment, and so on. In the future, there would be soldiers stationed in the space station for a long period of time, so he built everything he needed in one go. And as the first line of defense for the solar system against the demons, Li Anping had installed many weapon systems in space warfare. It was even equipped with antimatter bombs, which could be used as a means of self-destruction if the space station could not withstand the attack. About half an hour later, after the basic facilities of the space station were completed, Li Anping turned into light again and flew to the moon at the speed of light. This was because he didn't plan on directly positioning the space station's 4 warp gates to Earth. In that case, once the demons attacked, there was a possibility that they could directly come to Earth through the warp gates. Logically speaking, once the space station couldn't withstand the attack, Earth would cut off the 4 warp gates. But even if there was a possibility, Li Anping did not intend to take the risk. Therefore, his plan was that if the demons controlled the warp gates, the second battlefield would be on the moon and not directly on Earth. And if the demons came to the space station, the moon would close the warp gate between the moon and Earth. And he would rush to the moon next to build the warp gate on the moon and then prepare for the construction of the moon base. As the backing of the space station, there would be a large number of troops stationed here for a long time. In the future, after the transformation of Earth was completed, except for some basic security teams, most of the troops might be moved to the moon, the space station, and the White Land. After arriving at the moon at the speed of light, Li Anping directly chose the back of the moon as the location of the base. As Li Anping raised his right hand, countless huge steel walls rushed out from the ground. They intertwined with each other in mid-air, forming all kinds of buildings. It was as if the scene was fast-forwarded. However, when he felt the gravity of the moon, Li Anping suddenly snapped his fingers. The gravity of the entire moon was adjusted to about 1 times that of Earth. In Li Anping's plan, the cannon fodder troops on Earth would all be made up of mechanical troops in the future. As for the real humans, they would be managed like elite. The soldiers selected from the humans had to be nurtured into the elites of the elite. Therefore, he adjusted the gravity of the entire moon to 1 times that of Earth's. In the future, the soldiers on the moon would be the elites of the human race, except for the mechanical troops. As they became stronger, the gravity of the moon might be adjusted higher and higher. After the construction of the warp gates is completed, the headquarters of Desya Dragonfinch and the imaginary organization should all be built here. Earth will become an eternal fortress for humans. Then maybe the moon can be used as well. No, the moon is still too weak. Maybe I can modify a few neutron stars and turn them into dead stars. Then I can station the armies there and turn them into weapons for humans. However, it's still too time-consuming and laborious for me to do something like this now. I need to further unlock the power of the third stage, quantum computing. While Li Anping was thinking about these, countless calculations were still going on in his mind. Regardless of whether it was the work of the nanobugs on Earth or the construction of the base on the Moon, they did not stop. However, due to the great distance from Earth, there was a delay in the signal. Li Anping handed over part of the control work to the quantum computer under the Xiaolong K base. He could also take the opportunity to check out the effects of the artificial intelligence. While Li Anping was carrying out various constructions, in the star system where the magical planet was located, on an asteroid that was about the size of a soccer field, Dionysus was sitting cross-legged on the ground with his eyes closed, deep in thought. Clearly, after knowing that Li Anping could attack at the speed of light, he did not choose to continue hiding on the magical planet. It would be too easy for him to be found. Therefore, he chose an asteroid that was far away from the magical planet. Ever since the battle with Li Anping was not the only one who had taken a crucial step forward. Dionysus had also benefited greatly. If it could be said that the information about Earth that Shang Tian had given him had only given him some inspiration, but now, after the battle with Li Anping, he had truly started to value the materials that Shang Tian had given him. Every move, every detail, and every sentence that Li Anping had used in the battle with him kept replaying in his mind. During this period of time, he had relied on his extraordinary wisdom and energy, as well as the assistance of various magic spells. He had read through all the materials related to physics and mathematics. As the strongest mage on the Mondo continent, he had long possessed the ability to remember everything he had seen. It was the same for the materials on Earth. It was just that he had only memorized them previously and did not understand them in detail. Just then, Dionysus suddenly opened his eyes. A hint of comprehension flashed in his eyes, and he could not help but laugh out loud. The asteroid that he was sitting on suddenly underwent changes. Countless rocks, minerals, and metals started to dissipate. They didn't disintegrate into tiny particles. Instead, they completely disappeared. As Dionysus opened his right hand, a transparent gem suddenly appeared in his palm. So that's how it is, energy and matter can all be interchanged. This is the creation of things out of thin air. Halfway through his laughter, a hint of pride flashed in Dionysus' eyes as he murmured, "Li Anping, I'll give you a great surprise the next time we meet. You'll regret what you've done." At the next moment, the entire small planet disappeared completely. Dionysus opened up a teleportation gate in void space, and his entire body disappeared into it. Chapter 399. Li Anping spent about 6 hours to build a lunar base that was half the size of Tianjing. The entire moon was also covered by a large number of nanobugs in preparation for the mystic network in the future. After completing all these, Li Anping walked through the warp gate that led from the moon to Earth. Amidst a sea of blue light, he returned to the Xiaolong K base under Tianjing. What appeared in front of him was by Xinghe, Xia Likong, and a troop of 2,000 experts, who were all ready to go. Other than that, there were also a large number of ordinary soldiers, engineering robots, and a large number of materials, parts, and components in front of the warp gates of the other military regions. After the Earth army arrived at the magical planet, they would be able to build all kinds of war machines. "Your Majesty." Looking at Bai Xinghe and Xia Likong, who were bowing before him, Li Anping patted their shoulders and said, "I'll make a trip there personally today to build some things for you. But from tomorrow onward, you'll be in charge of conquering the magical planet." After all, Li Anping had spent many days on Earth. Now that Earth already had a great advantage over the magical planet, he did not intend to interfere any further. After all, he still needed to spend more time to complete the development of the third stage of quantum computing. At this stage, only when Li Anping became stronger would the entire human race become stronger. Hearing this, Bai Xinghe and Xia Likong trembled and shouted, "We won't let you down." Li Anping nodded and walked toward the warp gate first. "Let's go and take a look together." First, they would set up the lunar base. Then, they would set up the spatial gate. At the same time, they would rush to the magical planet to take over the captive. They would also set up a colonial base in the Umla Basin. The captives would be the first batch of residents and labor force of this base. However, when Li Anping led his troops through the warp gate and arrived at the magical planet, they discovered that something troublesome had happened. Missing. Looking at the soldier, who had some scratches on his face, Bai Xinghe asked in a low voice, "What happened?" "Sir, it should be the work of the natives." There was still hatred on the soldier's face as he said, "They attacked us." Hardly had Bai Xinghe gathered the remaining soldiers on the planet when he received the report that the 3 of them were missing. According to the subordinate's report, it was very likely that it was done by a sorcerer or warrior among the captives. Although the Earth Army had only sent out 20,000 people, they had slaughtered more than 300,000 people of the Magic Alliance Army with the help of advanced weapons. This was definitely a blood feud. If it weren't for Grand Magician Sibelius's powerful prestige, which temporarily suppressed their resistance, the two sides would have already started fighting again. However, although the natives knew nothing about the temporary evacuation of Li Anping, Bai Xinghe, and the rest of them, they did feel the decrease in the number of soldiers from Earth. Soon after, there was some friction between the two sides. At first, there were only people who insulted the soldiers of Earth, but later, it turned into a crowd of people who gathered to make trouble. Today, the disappearance of Earth's soldiers had actually occurred. Moreover, the Magic Alliance had used a portal to come here. That was why news of their defeat quickly spread across the entire continent. Recently, spies from the enemy were often spotted at the edge of the Amara Basin, causing the captives to become even more unstable. Although this defeat was a great loss for the 5 empires, it was obviously impossible for them to accept defeat so easily. However, because of the 5 Grand Magician Marshals, 1 had fled, 1 had surrendered, and 3 had died. In addition, Adam, the son of the demigod, had gone missing, and Dionysus had not given any new orders for a long time. They were hesitant. Bai Xinghe stood aside and asked, "Your Majesty, should we call Sibelius over?" Li Anping closed his eyes. Countless spiritual waves and electromagnetic waves were emitted from his body, enveloping the entire Amara Basin. When he opened his eyes again, there was already a hint of murderous aura in them. In his investigation, he found that the 3 missing soldiers had been chopped into pieces and thrown into a big pot of pig food for the captive. During this period of time, the captives had lost their logistical supplies. All the food had to be made by the sorcerers and found nearby. It was inevitable that there was not enough food. This was one of the reasons why they were making trouble. However, the cruelty and primitive nature of these natives was still beyond Li Anping's expectations. The 3 missing soldiers had been eaten, and the nanotechnology armor on their bodies had been stripped off and hidden away as treasures. "Our men must not die in vain," Li Anping said to Bai Xinghe. "Tell them to gather all the captives. Also, tie up the 12 people below and bring them to me. I want to execute them." Then, Li Anping reported to Bai Xinghe the locations of the 12 captives who had attacked or eaten the 3 soldiers and the cats they kept. When the Dragon Sparrow Guards, who were fully armed and wearing nanotechnology armor, rushed into the camp of the captives to capture them, a conflict immediately broke out. Over 1,000 native soldiers even stood out, wanting to stop them. However, when faced with Golden Light, who was personally leading the team, they did not have the power to stop him at all, unless Sibelius took action personally. However, Sibelius had seen Li Anping's power with his own eyes. How could he do something like this? In just a few hours, the news had spread throughout the entire camp. All the captives spent another 6 or so hours before they slowly gathered below the platform where Lianping was. Several 100,000 people were squeezed together, almost covering half of the Umla basin. Although they had gathered together, there were simply too many people. The people standing at the back could not see what was happening in front of them. All the soldiers from Earth had been mobilized to look after these captives. However, even though they were wearing nanotechnology armor and holding Gauss rifles, each soldier from Earth had to look after over 10 captives on average. Therefore, the ferocious gazes of these natives, as well as their restless appearance, still made the soldiers a little flustered. Suddenly, with a swoosh, a huge projection of Lianping appeared in the sky. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the image in the sky. After being together for a few days, these native soldiers had long known that the so-called demons had human faces, so they were not surprised. Instead, when they saw Lianping and the 12 tied-up soldiers appear in the sky, their emotions immediately surged. The hatred in their eyes seemed to be able to melt space itself. Lianping looked at the captives below his feet, who were raging with emotions, and did not say much. Instead, he directly announced the crimes of these 12 natives and gave them the death sentence. In order to make the death sentence more intimidating, Lianping purposely chose to behead them, which the natives could understand better. When the 12 natives were about to receive the death sentence in the image, the scene immediately boiled up. The noise turned into countless noises, and the buzzing sound almost made it impossible for people to hear what Lianping was saying. This situation reached a peak after the first native's head was chopped off. Below the high platform, at the position closest to Lianping, thousands of unarmed native soldiers, who had their weapons confiscated, rushed out first, wanting to rush up the high platform and save the prisoners who were sentenced to death. There were actually 5 sorcerers among them, who directly cast magic. They communicated with each other telepathically. Although it was very secretive, in front of Lianping, it was no different from shouting directly. "Do it! Attack that demon king! Sibelius has fallen! How can mages submit to these beasts?" It could be said that after surrendering, the sorcerers were the ones who were the most dissatisfied. This was because they were not like Sibelius, who had never seen Lianping's power. They had even participated in close combat with ability users, and had the upper hand for a while. To them, the most dangerous thing about the demons were the steel magical beasts that they had tamed. Once they closed the distance, these demons, who could not use magic, would not be able to withstand a single blow. The scene of the sentencing in front of them seemed to be the best opportunity for them to counterattack. Looking at these ferocious-looking soldiers and mages who were crazily attacking them, Lianping gently waved his hand and said, "Kill all those who resist." At the next moment, countless metal windstorms engulfed the soldiers who were charging over, causing them to fall down like rows after rows of wheat being harvested. As for the 5 sorcerers, although ordinary Gauss rifles were unable to tear through their protective force field, a figure had already appeared beside them. Endless power emanated from the hundreds of acupuncture points on Bai Xinghe's body. All kinds of magnetic fields, gravity, and magical elements were completely devoured by these acupuncture points. Back then, Shang Tian had only sent him 9 acupuncture points. However, when faced with the temptation of such power, Bai Xinghe was only dazed for a short moment before his heart was overwhelmed by his reverence for Lianping. Therefore, he directly handed this thing over to Lianping. It turned out that he had done the right thing. Not only did Lianping calculate all 720 acupoints with him, he even managed to catch Adam and the others in one fell swoop. Now, he naturally did not have to suppress the power of the 9 acupuncture points. Purple saber light flashed in the air, and the 5 sorcerers were sliced into countless pieces by this power that was enough to split the sea. When the images of the massacre below the high platform were broadcasted in the sky, even more captives were enraged. If you're a man, pick up your sword and chop all these sons of cheese up. They want to kill us all. If you don't want to die, charge out with me. Kill them. Most of the ordinary soldiers were still immersed in the fear of the demons due to the bombardment and the death of the magician Marshall. Even so, several tens of thousands of captives still charged toward the Earth soldiers beside them. There were even dozens of sorcerers who started to cast magic. Seeing this scene, on the high platform, Sibelius, who was also participating in this execution, let out a soft sigh and closed his eyes. Xiao Yekong's expression was also a little unsightly. He did not expect that after being bombarded for so long and losing over 300,000 people, there would still be so many native soldiers who dared to resist after resting for a few days. He did not know if they were ignorant and fearless, or if they were really so valiant and unafraid of death. However, before those sorcerers could release the magic in their hands, beams of high-energy lasers that were only as thick as a thumb descended from the sky and accurately pierced through their heads. Other than a hole in their forehead, there were no other injuries. The people around them did not receive any injuries either. It was as precise as a surgical operation. There were a total of 72 sorcerers who resisted, but not a single one of them managed to escape Li Anping's attack. And after losing the support of the sorcerers, the native soldiers who did not even have any weapons in their hands were obviously no match for modern weapons. In just a few minutes, several thousand people had fallen into pools of blood. Such a brutal massacre lasted for more than 20 minutes. When the number of these native corpses exceeded 50,000 and covered a large area of the ground, the blood seemed to have dyed the entire basin red. Finally, the crowd gradually fell silent. Apart from sporadic gunshots and angry roars, no other sound could be heard in the Amara basin. At this moment, Li Anping's voice once again resounded through the sky in the common language of the Mondo continent. I am Li Anping, and I am also the king of demons that you all think of. I am also the future master of the land under your feet, the future master of this planet. From today onwards, I will be your ruler. My words are your will, and they will be implemented in every corner of this land. For those who dare to resist, death is the only outcome. Chapter 400. After the remaining captives all fell silent, Li Anping sent soldiers to escort them back to the campsite. Then, he started to send them food from Earth. This was like a stick plus a red date. After letting them understand the cruel reality through death, they would not be left in total despair. After all, in the future, when the entire magic planet was taken over, Earth's strategy would still have to rely on many locals to manage the country. The captives in front of him were just the beginning. In the campsite, Ed looked at the bread and milk in his hands, feeling that his mouth was secreting a lot of saliva. He took a careful bite, and the fragrance that filled his mouth made him close his eyes in satisfaction. The taste of this bread was much better than the dry rations or black bread that he had eaten in the army in the past. He carefully finished the milk and then hid the remaining half of the bread in his arms. Walt walked over and sat down next to him. He looked at the Earth soldiers who were wearing silver-white nanotechnology armor and were in charge of guarding them outside the campsite. Walt said softly, "Ed, what do you think these silver demons plan to do with us?" "I don't know. This should be a problem that those mages are concerned about. Anyway, as long as I don't resist, they don't seem to want to kill me." Ed shrugged and said nonchalantly, "If I can eat such delicious bread and milk every day, it's fine even if I have to be their captive for the rest of my life." Walt frowned. He knew that Ed did not have a family, so he was not that anxious after being captured. However, he did have a family. Right now, his mind was filled with thoughts of how to escape from this place and then return. Initially, he had thought that with so many people from the Allied forces and so many sorcerers, it would be easy for them to escape together after the riot. However, after the massacre earlier, he clearly did not think so anymore. These silver demons were stronger, more evil, and more brutal than the legends said. Ed's lips twitched as he said, "You're not thinking of escaping, are you? You saw it earlier. Even those sorcerers were of no help. Even the martial sorcerer gave in. I think that unless Lord Dionysus takes action, even if the reinforcements come, it's hard to say who will win." Walt frowned and thought of that nightmarish battle. The roaring steel monster, the unextinguishable flames, and the suffocating air. Just as he sank into silence, a team of Earth soldiers arrived at the camp they were in. 2 robots that were over 2 meters tall, were wrapped in black metal, and had 2 huge feet appeared before them at the same time. That was an intelligent combat robot, the Defender. It could be programmed to fight automatically, and it could also be remotely controlled by humans to fight semi-intelligent battles. Other than the Gauss automatic machine gun on his shoulder, there were also plasma flamethrowers, great white shark rocket launchers, electromagnetic deflection passport, and other weapons. They could be called super killing machines on the battlefield. However, because its movement speed was very average, it did not participate in the previous battle. On the contrary, they were often used to watch over the captives. This wasn't the first time Walt, Ed, and the other captives had seen these steel golems. However, the steel puppets in front of him were much more intricate and intelligent than the ones created by the mages. Some people said that the silver demons sucked away the souls of humans and sealed them in the steel puppets. There were also some who said that someone was hiding in the puppets and manipulating them. However, Walt didn't think so. The space in the steel puppets was too small. At most, a child could fit in there. He thought that these steel puppets might be some kind of unknown magical beast, just like the fire-breathing monsters. Just as everyone was looking at the steel puppets and the soldiers in front of them with vigilance and indifference, the other party spoke. The way these silver demons spoke was very strange. Although they were all using the common language, they often spoke in the same tone and voice, as if they were the same person speaking. Also, they often made grammatical mistakes, like a 3-year-old child who had just learned how to speak. Walt and the others naturally didn't know that this was the translation function of the nano-armor used by the Earth soldiers. What they heard was the same electronic voice. After all, not every soldier could be proficient in language, or learn the language of the Mondo continent with their own learning mechanic. Therefore, the simultaneous translation of the Mondo Common Language, prepared by the Royal Academy of Sciences, was very useful. The silver demon in front of them said, "We need to choose some managers from among you to help us manage you. Who's interested?" Seeing the indifferent captives, the soldier knew their attitude. After asking a few more times and still not getting an answer, he pointed at Walt and said, "You, come with us." Walt pointed at himself and said in surprise, "Me?" Then, he thought of his family and felt the strange gazes of his companions around him. He lowered his head and said, "Sir, I can't do it. You can choose someone else." The Earth soldier was just randomly picking someone. Hearing this, he pointed at Ed and said, "Then you." Seeing Ed stand up and leave with the silver demons, Walt heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he and the people around him looked at Ed with pity as he left. In their eyes, Ed betrayed them so easily and helped the demons. In the end, he naturally wouldn't have a good ending. At Amara's outpost. Through the glass window, Bai Xinghe looked at the representatives from the camps who were chosen to manage the native soldiers and nodded. According to the detection of the satellites and Sibelius information, the entire Mondo continent had about 2 billion people. In order to rule them in a place that was similar to the Middle Ages, it was inevitable to use the locals to manage them. Lianping didn't need the resources of this planet. On the contrary, he would increase the productivity here and let the civilization of the entire Mondo continent develop rapidly. Compared to natural resources, Lianping naturally needed warriors who could fight more. Therefore, in the eyes of the Earth government, mages were the specialty of this colony. This was because Li Anping knew very well how powerful the demons were. They were born in the land of White, but they traveled through the endless worlds, occupying and destroying countless universes. The total number of demons far exceeded that of humans. Even Hygrim's memory didn't have an accurate number. However, from low-level demons to high-level demons, there were at least trillions of them. Therefore, even if quality wasn't taken into account, just the astonishing number of demons was a huge problem. Therefore, after completely conquering this place, they would carry out a large-scale mage education and absorb talented mages. This would be one of the strategies of this colony. The mages would become one of the sources of soldiers for Earth. In an asteroid belt, there were irregularly shaped meteorites, asteroids, and radiation everywhere. There was no air, no water, and the temperature was more than -100 degrees Celsius. This place could be said to be a true forbidden zone for life. However, in such a forbidden zone for life, Dionysus stood quietly. Streams of black light swallowed and spat out from the surface of his body. Then, one meteorite after another was drawn over. Before these meteorites could get close to his body, they were disintegrated into countless particles. Then, they disappeared in an inexplicable wave. Yes, they had completely disappeared from this universe. As more and more matter disappeared, the black light on Dionysus' body became stronger and stronger. An increasingly terrifying wave of energy continued to emerge from his body. It was as if his strength was increasing at an unprecedented speed. At first, it was just meteorites. Then, it was asteroids. More and more matter entered Dionysus' body, causing his power to increase endlessly. He opened his eyes, and light that was comparable to the sun shot out from his eyes. It was as if it was going to pierce through this world completely. An excited smile appeared on his face. He opened his mouth and let out a silent cry. The terrifying wave swept across the asteroid belt in the vicinity of several thousand kilometers, disintegrating everything into the most basic atoms. Then, all of them were absorbed into Dionysus' body. Very good, that's it. This is the power that a god should have. In about a year, I'll be able to absorb the entire asteroid belt. By then, I'll only need a day to devour the entire planet. Next will be the sun, the galaxy, the star clusters, and even the entire universe. I'll become the only god in this world. At this moment, Dionysus had already placed all his attention on his path to becoming a god. The so-called demons and Li Anping were no longer in his mind. Just as he was completely immersed in the ecstasy of becoming a god, a cyan tunnel suddenly appeared in front of him. It was like a whirlpool in the sea. A man wrapped in cyan light appeared in front of him. Dionysus subconsciously launched an attack, wanting to capture this person who had suddenly appeared in front of him. The gravity spell was instantly activated, and 10 times the gravity was applied to the other party, but there was no reaction at all. Therefore, 10 times the gravity immediately became 100 times the gravity, but the other party still did not show any changes. Just as Dionysus was about to launch another attack, the other party spoke. A stream of consciousness bypassed Dionysus' layers of defense and entered his mind. Don't make such boring attempts. What's before you is just a message. Do you think you can attack messages? Dionysus said coldly, Who are you? An earthling? Or someone from the Mondo continent? Human? Why are you always so unimaginative? You're not the only creatures in this world. The cyan figure shrugged and said, I'm the Tide of Chaos, the spokesperson of chaos in the multiverse, one of the demonic gods of the land of White. The reason why I'm talking to you in my human form is that I think it'll be easier for you to accept this. I didn't expect that your first choice is still to attack rather than communicate. Humans are really one of the crudest creatures in the entire universe. Of course, Dionysus did not know what the land of White and the so-called demonic gods represented. No one had given him any information in this regard. However, the other party gave him a very dangerous feeling. Dionysus said warily, "Tide of chaos, why have you come to look for me? Don't be nervous. I'm a demon who hates violence and likes to communicate. Assimilating everything, destroying everything, or devouring everything like other demons do doesn't have a sense of beauty. Chaos is the true essence of the multiverse. All the worlds will forever be in chaos. The so-called order is just a temporary stop between chaos and chaos." Dionysus said coldly, "I'm not curious about your interests at all. Tell me why you've come here." Seeing that Dionysus did not let down his guard at all and that the surrounding magical elements were gathering rapidly, preparing to launch the next wave of attacks, the Tide of Chaos smiled and said, "I only have one goal in coming here, which is to create chaos. There's not much that can be done on Earth. That's why I've come here to look for you. It's impossible for you to defeat Lianping purely through the conversion of mass and energy. However, with this there'll be some interesting variables." Amidst Chaos Tide's laughter, he turned into countless streams of green light and disappeared. Dionysus, on the other hand, found a strange memory in his mind. At the next moment, his eyes were filled with ecstasy. Chapter 401. In a void space that traversed through countless universes. At the same time as the chaotic tides sent the information to Dionysus, an unprecedented war almost engulfed another universe. With every second, several 100 million planets and battleships kept on plunging. There were also countless planets that were set ablaze and life forms were destroyed. Destructive powers that were like the Milky Way in the sky turned into various radiances, flashing in the nebula. Simultaneously, two terrifying consciousnesses appeared in the same galaxy one after another, clashing and getting entangled with each other incessantly. "Qing, are you using that mysterious chaos theory of yours again? We should be occupying this universe instead of instigating a civil war among them and watching coldly as these ants engage in meaningless fights." "No, I believe that the entire multivariate universe was born from a conscious thought, and the essence of consciousness is the amalgamation of endless chaos. Our existence isn't a coincidence. The universe won't change because of the thoughts of consciousness. Matter exists eternally. It's just that it keeps on moving and changing. Even we are merely a part of the multivariate universe. This war of yours has proven my theory. Both sides of the war will eventually turn into the dust of history, and the universe will continue to operate according to its laws. Huang, the success and failure this time around can't prove anything. While we're arguing, I've spread a few more seeds of chaos. One day, they'll prove my theory." At the next moment, the two consciousnesses stopped talking. They were like a tempest in the universe, sweeping through the entire galaxy, and then suddenly disappearing. However, just the repercussions from the conversation between these two demonic gods across countless worlds were enough to bring about all sorts of disastrous consequences. As the two consciousnesses swept through, the fixed star in this galaxy was extinguished, and its exterior started to expand. When the pressure increased to a certain limit, it would gradually turn into a new white dwarf. All life forms in the entire galaxy would gradually die out after losing light and heat. Over 20 days later, in the study of the palace in Tianjing, Lianping floated in midair with his eyes closed. Countless rays scanned his body, inspecting each and every particle in his body. The third stage of quantum computation. Changing the circulation process of each particle requires a tremendous amount of energy and computing ability, and it has to be maintained at all times. But with the simulation of the quantization process, I'll also be able to develop powers that I've never had before. According to my calculations, every 7 days, my strength will double. This speed can't be changed. Pure seclusion is already meaningless. The next moment, Lianping opened his eyes, landed on the ground, and walked out of the door. In a month's time, simple warp gates had entered every household, and Lianping's study was no exception. But this time, the space warp gate didn't activate. Lianping was like a ghost as he stepped through the door and arrived outside the study. He took a deep breath and adjusted the oxygen content in the air to the most suitable proportion for human survival. It could effectively promote the blood circulation of the human brain and enhance the efficiency of human thinking. Looking up, the sun was shining brightly in the sky. There had been no rain on Earth for more than a month because the water circulation in the atmosphere had been handed over to nanomite. However, according to the recent voting results of the citizens, from next week onward, Lianping would choose 3 days of rain every month. However, as each drop of rain was under Lianping's control, they would not drip onto humans, nor would they form puddles or cause other negative effects. When each drop of rain came close to a human body, it would automatically move away from the side of the human body, landing directly into the city's drainage system or converging into the sea. If humans wanted to get drenched in the rain, they could only return home and take a shower in the shower room. As he appeared outside the door, Xiao Shuisu immediately stood up and said, "Your Majesty, do you need any arrangements?" Although the current Lianping could send all information to any terminal on Earth with just a single thought, Xiao Shuisu still persisted with her old habit. She tried her best to stay close to Lianping, waiting for his summons. "After the wedding, you'll become my wife. There's no need for you to do this." After Lianping saw Xiao Shuisu's stubborn gaze, he did not continue speaking. It was just like how there would still be people who liked trains even after airplanes came into existence. After computer games came into existence, there would still be people who missed the arcade games. Humans were not machines. They liked the most efficient means, but they did not always like to use the most efficient means. Although Lianping did not need Xiao Shuisu's care, her attitude still made his heart, which had been cold for a long time, feel a trace of warmth. Although he could already know everything he wanted to know on Earth just by relying on the transmission of information, he still chatted with Xiao Shuisu like an ordinary human. "Are Claudia and Anna here?" "Yes, Your Majesty. However, Miss Anna has been working overtime for the past few days and rarely stays in the palace." Over the past 20-odd days, Lianping had been staying in the palace's study to study his body, and the changes in the world were getting greater and greater. Other than Lianping's continuous optimization of the environment, with the popularization of warp gates, people's travel had become unprecedentedly simple, and the distance between Earth had been reduced once again. However, there was still a group of people who opposed Lianping's modifications. They were called the World Green Organization. However, the members of this organization only called for people to return to nature, return to the streets, and maintain the original appearance of the city. Other than that, they did not have any radical ideas. Therefore, the Earth's government did not send people to ban them. However, with the popularization of warp gates and the various benefits brought about by the improvement of the environment, their supporters dwindled. There were even reports that the organization's upper echelons used warp gates to travel. Not only that, other than the warp gates, Lianping also handed over all kinds of technological information he obtained from the Red Queen, as well as various theories and designs of various ultramodern facilities that he had spent a few minutes to organize, to the Royal Academy of Sciences, so that they could slowly promote them to the world. Today was the first time the mysterious web had entered the major warp gate stores on Earth. The mysterious web was an important means for Lianping to develop the entire Earth in the future, so he could not help but focus his attention on the sales of the major stores. Tianjing, 25th Avenue. Since the wee hours of the morning, citizens had been lining up in front of the warp gate stores one after another. It looked just like how enthusiasts used to line up to buy mobile phones, games, or game consoles. However, unlike the past, where people would rush over one by one from the streets, This time the citizens all came out of the stores and walked to the end of the long line. This was because most people directly teleported from the warp gate at home to the store's warp gate and then came out of the store. Now, every store in Tianjin was directly funded by the government to install warp gates at their front doors. In order to cope with the first day of the mysterious web sales, the store employees directly opened all night. Because everyone came directly from the warp gates, it was very convenient. Therefore, the number of people lining up for the mysterious web far exceeded the number of people lining up for any product in the past. There were so many people that the warp gates were congested. The store had to temporarily increase the number of warp gates to solve this problem. At the same time, reporters from television stations also arrived and began interviewing the citizens in the line. "Hello, sir. May I ask, when did you start queuing?" "Oh, I went to bed at 6 last night and came here at 3 this morning. However, I didn't expect there to be so many people." "Then why did you come here so early to line up? Or is there something about the mysterious web that attracted you?" Naturally, different people had different answers to this question. A man wearing glasses said, I've seen the introduction of the mysterious web. It can analyze a human's brain waves and send signals to all electronic devices. It's not just warp gates. It can also control computers, televisions, hot water bottles, air conditioners, and almost everything in the house. This is simply an epoch-making product." A middle-aged woman said, "The old people at home always make mistakes when inputting coordinates on the keyboard. I felt that the mysterious web was very convenient, so I came to take a look. I didn't expect there to be so many people." On the other side, a few girls said one after another, "This mysterious web was also invented by His Majesty Lianping. We are here to support His Majesty. 1, 2, 3, long live His Majesty." These few girls were obviously Lianping's female fans. A few hours later, the first person in the world to buy the mysterious web appeared. It was a martial artist from Baiwei. On his index finger, there was a silver-white ring without any patterns on it. Because the mysterious web had used a suspense method to advertise before, no one knew what the external equipment of the mysterious web looked like. It was only at this moment that the mystery was revealed. The martial artist wore the ring and walked toward a warp gate without entering any destination. He then disappeared in a blue light instead of going through the warp gate directly. The buyers on the street were in an uproar. However, they would only know what this meant after a long time. Chapter 402. While Lianping was in seclusion on the magic planet, the base in the Umla Basin was also bustling with activity. As more and more Earth soldiers and engineering robots came here, a large number of factories and lathes were continuously manufactured. The streamlined and systematic manufacturing system of human civilization displayed unparalleled power. War vehicles, fighter jets, tanks, combat robots, transport ships, and other weapons of war were assembled and manufactured one after another. The huge war machines shocked the captives again and again, constantly crushing their fighting spirit. In the past half a month or so, perhaps because they had lost the unified command of Dionysus, although the 5 great empires and other small countries had sent many spies to search around the basin, they had not sent any troop. According to the confessions of the captured spies, the general staff judged that these countries were not united. Without the restraint of a powerful force like Dionysus, they had fallen into all kinds of internal strife before the war had even begun. In particular, 4 of the 5 great empires had lost their martial magisters. The capital of the Holy Roland Empire in the Umla Basin had been bombed, countless cities and towns were destroyed, and their martial magisters had defected to the enemy. It could be said that the empire had suffered a great loss. The upper leaders of the entire country had fallen into an endless struggle for power and profit, and the other 4 empires were also eyeing their weak old friends covetously. The Holy Roland Empire could be said to be truly in a precarious situation. It was good enough that they could send some spies to the Umla Basin to collect information. How could they have the time to continue fighting these silver demons? But this was obviously good news for the Earth, which could give them more time to assemble and build Earth's weapons. After all, the size of the portal was limited, and many powerful weapons could not be directly driven over. Otherwise, with the combat weapons that were far more advanced than this era, the last war would have ended much more easily. And just as the Earth army was constantly building one amazing weapon after another on the land of the magic planet, the captives, who were managed layer by layer, were also being militarized and trained by the Earth during this period. They were uniformly managed in groups of 10, 10 groups were a team, 10 teams were a squad, 10 squads were a battalion, and 10 battalions were a regiment. The leaders of each level were directly appointed by the Earth as native soldiers. Aida, who had previously been selected as the team leader, was now directly promoted to squad leader due to his outstanding performance during the training, replacing the previous squad leader who had opposed the training. Dozens of people were lying on the grass. They had just finished a 10-kilometer run and were all gasping for breath, as if they were about to die. These silver demons actually tortured us like this. I'd rather go back and be a slave. The distance we've run is enough to circle around Riven. Are these silver demons crazy? Do they want us to run like this every day? What's the point of standing in line? It's meaningless. Listening to their complaints, Aida didn't say anything. He just looked at the time, clapped his hands and said, "Okay, it's time to rest. Next up is the forward step training. The 5 worst performers won't have dinner tonight." Hearing Aida's words, the native soldiers who were lying on the ground complaining immediately stood up. Compared to the harsh training, they were much more relaxed. The food provided by Earth was very attractive to them. Even if it was just a custom-made snack box, it was still a delicacy that most of them had never been late to in their lives. And a series of running and line training, it was obvious that Earth was using military training on the captives in front of them. They naturally didn't expect these captives to have any results from their training. They just hoped that through such training, they could strengthen their discipline and obedience and help Earth rule the entire magic planet in the future. After all, these armies from the Middle Ages had poor military discipline. With Aida's order, a group of people quickly stood up. Some of them looked at Aida, who was in charge of commanding them, with contempt and resentment. This traitor, he actually helped those silver demons to torture us. Someone sneered, he won't be arrogant for long. When the 5 Nations Coalition army arrives, once the silver demons are sent back to Hell's Gate, people like him are dead meat. What an idiot, he actually succumbed to the demons. On the side, Walt listened to the voices of his companions and silently lowered his head. No one knew what he was thinking. But since Aida became the team leader, he didn't talk to him much. Obviously, in his heart, Aida had become someone who might implicate him when the Empire settled accounts in the future. Under Aida's command, everyone began to march forward. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. The tremor came from the depths of the Umla Basin, where a large number of metal buildings were. What's going on? Are the buildings of those evil demons going to collapse? Those metal buildings seemed to be shaking. 5 kilometers away from them, there was a huge complex of buildings that were completely made of metal and somewhat similar to a combination of a battleship and an aircraft carrier. When the Earthlings had just finished building the outer shell of this building, they had been mocked by the native. The craftsmanship of these silver demons is very good, and the things they build are all very exquisite. But they actually built a huge ship in the basin? And it's a huge ship made of steel. I bet that this ship won't float even if it's in a river. Maybe these silver demons like to make their buildings look like ships. But now, looking at the ground that was constantly shaking and the aircraft carrier that was slowly rising in the distance, they couldn't help but laugh. The natives who had once mocked these buildings could no longer laugh. This time, Bai Xinghe had ordered a total of 6 aircraft carriers to be built on Magic Planet. Their basic technology had all been obtained from the previous aircraft carrier of the King of Gods. Now, they had also combined the various epoch-making technologies provided by Li Anping. They had already been tested on Earth, but this time, Bai Xinghe had ordered them to be dismantled and sent to Magic Planet. These aircraft carriers were all powered by a vacuum zero-point energy reactor and an antimatter reactor. Every single one of them was over 1.5 kilometers in length and weighed 70,000 tons. There were over 100 cannons at the bottom of the hull, and they could carry 50 of the latest model of Thunder fighters. In a war within the atmosphere, such aircraft carriers were simply the ultimate weapons that were completely beyond the imagination of the Mundo continent, which was still in the Middle Ages. Moreover, things like flying had a special meaning to these civilizations with a lower level of technology. Not only did these 6 aircraft carriers have great tactical value, but they also had great strategic significance. This was because, in addition to their powerful destructive power, they were shocking enough to reduce the courage of most of the natives. Although the magic of the Mundo continent had been developed for thousands of years, it had always been focused on the exploration of the mages themselves. There were no flying castles or magic battleships that could compare to the weapons of the Earth's military. When the bottom of the 6 aircraft carriers spurted out plasma flames, and the hulls that were like small mountains flew hundreds of meters into the air, the captives who were still training, complaining, or helping with the construction of the base all looked at the spaceships in the sky in a daze, revealing an extremely shocked expression. One had to know that this world didn't even have airplanes. Yet, they saw the aircraft carriers directly. How is this possible? How can these steel ships fly? This is the power of the demons. The spies outside the basin were all attracted by the aircraft carriers in the sky. They all looked at the sky in shock. This was the first time a war weapon had landed on the Mundo continent. We have to immediately inform His Majesty that the demons are stronger than we thought. There are no magic waves. Who can tell me how these 6 airships can fly? Go back and tell the President that these demons have weapons that we don't know about. Bai Xinghe, who was standing in the control room of the aircraft carrier, looked at the shocked expressions of the captives on the screen and nodded in satisfaction. The biggest use of the aircraft carriers was to intimidate the native. Letting the 6 aircraft carriers stay on the Magic Planet would greatly help Earth's rule. Thinking of this, Bai Xinghe pointed in the direction of the electronic map and ordered, "Activate the railguns. Give these natives a surprise." The spies more than 10 kilometers away did not know that they had become the targets of the aircraft carriers. The cannonballs shot out at a speed of 20 kilometers per second. The spies sent to investigate could not react at all. They were directly torn to pieces by the violent shockwaves and the scattered shrapnel. And this was only the first cannonball. Each of the 6 aircraft carriers had 24 railguns. After a series of flashes and loud booms, a total of 6 locations where the spies were more than 10 kilometers away were drowned in huge explosions. The soaring flames directly covered the entire surface of the Earth. When the smoke gradually dispersed, only huge and ugly craters could be seen on the surface of the Earth. The loud boom of the cannonballs seemed to have brought the captives back to that terrifying war. They all looked at the aircraft carriers in the sky with fear and trepidation. At the same time, all the spies who were not attacked by the railguns quickly retreated from the Amara Basin. The silver demons rode steel dragons that could soar in the sky. Each steel dragon could spit out huge pieces of iron. Once these pieces of iron landed on the ground, they would cause shocking explosions. Countless similar intelligence reports were sent to the leaders of the 5 empires within a few days. Chapter 403. In the next 10 days, with the aircraft carriers in the sky as the vanguard, coupled with countless ground combat units, the entire Earth's army was like a hot knife through butter on the Mondo continent. In just 10 days, the entire Holy Roland continent had been captured. In the face of such super-advanced combat weapons, just the appearance of the 6 aircraft carriers was enough to make the native army lose half of their courage. The subsequent firepower bombardment made everyone, except for the magicians, unable to resist. As for the magicians, because they had teleportation portals, charm humans, and other magic related to space and illusion, apart from most of them dying under the artillery fire, there were always some magicians who could board the aircraft carriers and try to destroy these steel monsters. However, each of the 6 aircraft carriers was guarded by powerful ability users, such as Bai Xinghe, Xia Likong, Jin Guang, Yen Bei, Mephisto, Sibelius, and so on. To the magicians who broke into the aircraft carriers, each of them was like a nightmare. Moreover, the aircraft carriers themselves had powerful internal monitoring capabilities, with countless probes, infrared rays, heat sensors, sonar, and so on. In addition, there were lasers and gunpowder weapons inside. These magicians could be found and executed with methods that were far beyond their imagination. Compared to defeating the armies and magicians of the Middle Ages, what really wasted the Earth Army's time was taking over the occupied territories and countless captives. However, at this time, the captive army trained in the Umla Basin was very useful. Every time they arrived at a town, after defeating the local army, the Earth Army would kill or kidnap all the magicians, leaving behind some soldiers and captives to maintain the local administration. They also built a teleportation portal in the local area. Without the magicians, the Earth soldiers who had nano-armor, particle guns, and high-frequency knives were simply not something that the ordinary people of the Mondo continent could fight against. Moreover, once something happened, the Earth Army located in various positions could rush over to support at any time through the teleportation portal. Therefore, they could only helplessly accept the rule of the other party. However, in addition to the threat of force, the food that the Earth government transported and distributed through the teleportation portal, coupled with the good military discipline of the Earth Army, were very good to stabilize the emotions of the locals. Wiseman Empire, capital of Kansasson. In the palace hall, King Wendell III threw the report in his hand to the ground and shouted angrily, "A bunch of trash. A steel dragon that is bigger than a town? A battleship that can float in the sky? A giant steel bird that can fly in the sky and is bigger than a house? Every roar of the steel beast can cause a shocking explosion. This is your intelligence? Is this the information I got after losing more than 800 spies? Ridiculous. That's ridiculous. What I want to know is how many people there are on the other side. How did those silver demons defeat the sorcerer? Their weaknesses, what their weapons are, what they eat. Not these fairy tales, fantasies, and poems." Just as Wendell III flew into a rage, a white-haired magic shooter came out. As the most powerful sorcerer in the Wiseman Empire after the death of the Grand Magus Marshal and Wendell III's uncle, his words carried a lot of weight in the Empire. He quietly said, "Your Majesty, according to the intelligence, the entire Holy Roland Empire has been involved in the flames of war. The so-called steel beasts, if it were just a few pieces of intelligence, it might be doubtful. But since all the spies have received the same information, then we should accept this fact. The demons do have some kind of terrible power, perhaps a power that can rival magic." As soon as his words came out, it immediately caused an uproar in the hall. Although the continuous intelligence about the demons made all the nobles have to face the authenticity of this information seriously, and even the defeat of the 5 Grand Magus Marshals and the demigod's son Adam shocked them with the power of the demons. But this was the first time someone publicly said that the power of the demons could rival magic. This was simply disgraceful in the continent of Mondo, where magic had been supreme for thousands of years. Even Wendell III frowned. He was also a magic shooter, and in fact, all the kings of the continent of Mondo were mages. Naturally, he was unhappy to hear such words. Sir Hymen, I beg to differ with your conclusion. The greatness of magic is indisputable. The defeat of the 5 Grand Magus Marshals is only temporary. We still have the Magus Legion, the Mage Guild, the Imperial Royal Mages, and the Templar Mages. In terms of group warfare, they are more important than the Grand Magus Marshals. The Holy Roland Empire has been caught in the flames of war. What we need to do now is to send troops to support them with the other countries. And the Cloud Courtyard. We need Sir Dionysus' guidance. We can't send troops at will. The other 3 powerful countries are still eyeing us covetously. What if they, although Hymen's words were shocking, it still didn't attract the attention of the nobles? The greatness of magic was too deeply ingrained. In addition, the continent of Mondo lacked the means to record images. They hadn't really seen the Earth's army, so it was hard for them to imagine the power of a modern army. Just when the whole hall was once again in a debate, a roar suddenly came from outside the palace. Countless thunderous roars came from the sky. The official of the Imperial Intelligence Department was startled and immediately shouted, "It's the sound of the iron birds controlled by the Silver Demon." Just when everyone was in a brief moment of surprise, a guard ran in, knelt in front of Wendell III and shouted, "Your Majesty, there are 6 huge metal flying objects above the Imperial City." What? A few minutes later, Wendell III came to a tower in the palace with a group of ministers. They saw that the entire sky above the palace had been covered by huge shadows. 6 floating aircraft carriers quietly stopped hundreds of meters above their head. Countless fighter jets and aircraft crossed the sky above the capital from time to time, circling around the 6 floating aircraft carriers, making bursts of sonic booms. Wendell III looked at the behemoths in the sky with an ashen face. At this moment, he finally knew what the intelligence written by the spies was about. And any king of a country would be in a bad mood if someone flew directly above their palace in an aircraft. The ministers at the side had looks of shock, surprise, and fear in their eyes. Even though there was no lack of magic shooters among them, the 6 floating aircraft carriers that were the size of small hills still gave them a huge sense of oppression. At this moment, a light flashed in front of them, and Bai Xinghe's holographic image appeared in front of them. "Hello, everyone. You must be the current King of Wisemen, Wendell III." Bai Xinghe looked at the ashen Wendell III in front of him and said calmly, "I'm the general of the heavenly army, Bai Xinghe. I'm here only because the God King is about to arrive on the Mondo continent. He will completely rule this land. You have 2 choices now, surrender or die." Because of Adam's propaganda in the early days of the Mondo continent, all the local natives treated the Earth army as demons. This increased the unnecessary cost of Earth's rule. Therefore, in order to make it easier to rule the magic planet, the Earth army decided to promote Earth as the legendary god realm in the following battles, and Lianping would naturally be the god of the gods in the legends. In this medieval era, this kind of religious method of governance was obviously much more effective than purely using force to suppress or lure people with benefits. The floating aircraft carriers and various modern weapons that the Earth army had could easily make the locals believe that they came from the god realm. The success of this method will probably lead Earth to use a similar method when colonizing all the worlds with lower levels of civilization. The god realm? Wendell III said with a frown. That's right. Adam blasphemed against the gods and was killed by the god king himself. Dionysus has also gone into hiding because he is afraid of the wrath of the gods. Now, King of Wisemen, this is your last chance to atone for your sins. Whether you choose to accept the guidance of the god realm or the wrath of the gods is entirely up to you. Wendell III looked at the floating battleships in the sky and then looked at Bai Xinghe in front of him. A hint of struggle flashed in his eyes. In the end, he roared, "Wisemen will never yield, not even to the gods." As he spoke, a flame shot out from his fingertip and pierced through Bai Xinghe's holographic image in front of him. Bai Xinghe's holographic image flashed a few times as if the signal was bad. He sneered and disappeared completely. Following Wendell III's roar and attack, the ministers behind him and the soldiers on the tower all cheered. Countless magic preparations were needed. Siege crossbows engraved with magic spells were aimed at the floating aircraft carriers in the sky. In the command room of the aircraft carriers, Bai Xinghe looked at the palace under his feet and the people who were full of fighting spirit on the screen. He ordered coldly, "Begin Plan B." On each of the 6 floating aircraft carriers, 3 plasma cannons were aimed at Wendell III's position. Plasma with a temperature of more than millions of degrees drowned them completely. All the magic fields and protective barriers were torn apart by the high temperature in an instant. They could not resist at all. As for the rest of the people who dodged by vaporizing, teleporting, or using spells such as scapegoating, they were targeted automatically by other railguns, electromagnetic cannons, particle cannons, high-energy lasers, and other weapons. The fire control system of the entire floating aircraft carrier was controlled by smart computers. With the reaction and performance that were far beyond that of human beings, the sorcerers did not have time to counterattack at all before they were blown into pieces by the continuous attacks. A few powerful sorcerers were not killed immediately. They charged directly at the floating aircraft carriers in the sky. However, before they could get within 100 meters of the aircraft carriers, they were torn into pieces by the fighter jets that swarmed over. In less than 10 seconds, the entire palace had turned into a sea of fire. The huge explosions and the unidentified flying objects in the sky caused large-scale panic in the city. At this moment, Bai Xinghe's voice spread across the entire city through the loudspeakers of the aircraft carriers again. Wendell III has received divine punishment for blasphemy against the gods. From today onwards, the entire wise men will be guided by the god. All those who are willing to be guided by the gods, kneel down. After 10 breaths, all those who are unwilling to be guided will bear the wrath of the gods. The next moment, all kinds of scanning devices had entered the location of everyone in the city into the computer. Countless cannons on the floating aircraft carriers were aimed downward. A cruel massacre was about to begin. All those who were unwilling to kneel would be blown into pieces by the Gaussian machine guns precisely controlled by the computer. Those who were willing to surrender would escape and be managed by the army and captives from Earth. Chapter 404. In the dining hall of the palace. On the huge dining table, there were only Li Anping and Anna, but there were at least hundreds of dishes from all over the world. All over the world was not an adjective. Due to the existence of the space warp gate, these dishes were all from famous kitchens from all over the world. The local head chef personally prepared the dishes and then sent them to Li Anping's table. Although Li Anping did not need food, a single word from him was enough to make the people below him busy for half a day to prepare the most high-end dishes for him. Although there were only the 2 of them, Li Anping did not feel that there were too many dishes and that it was too wasteful. It was because humans had never had such abundant food reserves as they did now. On the entire Earth, regardless of whether it was animals or plants, all of them were thriving under Li Anping's control. The wastage of food did not affect humans at all. Li Anping pointed to a plate of beef and said, "This is grilled beef tendon made by the Tyrol royal chef. It is cooked with unique spices, and the preparation time alone takes 6 hours. They specially selected black cattle bred in the crevices of Tyrol, and it tastes pretty good. I got them to order it yesterday. Try it." Although Li Anping had not eaten this famous dish before, he had the ability to monitor the entire Earth. There was nothing on Earth that he did not know. There was no need for Li Anping to give any instructions. With his introduction, the maids at the side had already taken the initiative to cut up the grilled beef tendon and put it on plates, sending them to Li Anping and Anna's plates. Seeing Anna take a small bite, Li Anping asked expectantly, "How is it? Is it good?" Anna revealed a smile. It's very tender and very flavorful. It's good that you like it. At the next moment, the two of them once again fell into silence. Although Anna had already agreed to marry Lianping, this was the first time the two of them had met in the past few months. Compared to the previous time, Anna was still filled with youthful vitality. It was unknown if it was because of her work experience, but her beautiful face had become thinner than before. However, she also had an intellectual disposition. As for Lianping, he had always been in control of his physical structure. As long as he did not take the initiative to change, there would not be any slight physical changes to his body. However, Anna knew that Lianping was very different from the past. This was especially so when he changed the world and completely changed the entire Earth's environment. That godlike power made ordinary people feel that he was very far away from them. In fact, there were already many religions that worshipped Lianping on Earth. They worshipped Lianping as a god, and there were many people who joined them. Although the government felt that it was a little strange, they did not prohibit them as long as they did not break the law. In particular, the god they worshipped was the current master of Earth. When the government made decisions, they would of course take into consideration Lianping's feelings. They even suspected that Lianping was not happy to see this. However, to Lianping, who was constantly monitoring the world, these things were just a small wave. Even though it would not be an exaggeration to say that his current power was that of a god, if these religions really crossed the line, Lianping would deal with them himself. However, this phenomenon of Lianping ascending to the altar made Anna feel that she was getting further and further away from Lianping. However, for some reason, when Wang Chong personally came to ask her if she was willing to become one of Lianping's wives, she still agreed. In the depths of her heart, there was always a soft place where she still had feelings for Lianping back when she was in university. Amidst the silence, Lianping took a bite of the beef tendon on the plate. However, the exquisite taste was unable to attract his attention. Looking at Anna, he suddenly asked, "Are you afraid of me?" Anna suddenly lifted her head in surprise. She looked at Lianping and said, "No, I just feel that time has passed very quickly. I feel that you've changed a lot." "That's right. I still remember when we were in university, we were still working together. In the blink of an eye, you've already graduated as a postgraduate and have been working for 1 year." Anna suddenly laughed softly. "Do you still remember the road next to the Polytechnic Institute? When I went back to take a look last year, they had changed the name of the road to Lianping Road. They even built a statue of you and placed it in the square." Of course, Lianping knew about this. Not only did he know about it, but he was also able to see the scenery of Lianping Road and his statue through the endless nanobug. Back then, the university was forced to expel him due to the pressure of the case. Later, they wanted to ease the relationship between the two parties through various flattering behaviors. However, Lianping naturally didn't have time to pursue this kind of trivial matter. However, the new mayor of Zhongdu City thought that he understood the situation. In order to please Lianping, he cleaned up the entire university. All the people related to the expulsion of Lianping were all fired. Although he knew everything, when he heard Anna's words, Lianping still pretended to be an ordinary person who didn't know anything. He smiled and said, "Is that so? If there's a chance, let's go take a look together. By the way, have you been busy with work recently? Are you happy at the Warp Center? Do you need me to help you change your position?" "No need." Anna shook her head and said softly, "I like the work at the Warp Center. The feeling of being at the center of the world makes me feel very comfortable. As long as you like it." Lianping suddenly took out a tube of medicine from under the table. He shook his finger and the medicine floated in front of Anna. "This is the medicine of immortality. Although it can't truly make a person immortal, it can greatly slow down the aging of the human body and increase the lifespan of a human." Because Lianping had mastered the technology of freely synthesizing elements, The Aryes had overcome one obstacle after another with his help. Humanity had ushered in an era of unprecedented wealth. The medicine of immortality was naturally one of them. The price of this medicine was about the same as gold in the past. However, Lianping didn't let the Aryes popularize the medicine for the time being. Right now, humanity's mental state wasn't enough to handle an excessively long lifespan. This would lead to many ethical problems. Lianping's plan was to popularize the medicine of immortality after the profound web was fully opened and humanity's mental and moral standards were greatly improved. Of course, as people who were close to Lianping, Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia were naturally able to enjoy this medicine in advance. Anna took the white medicine and looked at this immortal medicine that only existed in legends. She couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. However, when she thought about how the other 3 women would definitely have this medicine as well, an indescribable sourness appeared in her heart. Just as this sourness appeared in her heart, a pair of warm arms hugged her from behind. Lianping appeared behind her as if he had teleported and hugged Anna. When the surrounding maids saw this scene, they all silently retreated. Anna felt the other's breath on her chest, and a trace of redness appeared on her face. The feeling of unfamiliarity and alienation from before seemed to have disappeared with this hug. She weakly struggled a few times but couldn't break free. In the end, she turned around to look at Lianping and discovered that he was also looking at her in a daze. This made her blush even more. Feeling a wave of desire rise between the two of them, Anna closed her eyes in resignation. However, her constantly trembling eyelashes showed that she wasn't calm at all. However, after a long time, the intimate action she imagined didn't happen. She couldn't help but open her eyes in confusion. Lianping? A strange feeling rose in Anna's heart. Was Lianping distracted? Lianping seemed to have suddenly reacted. His body retreated, and he appeared in his original seat again. He said apologetically, "I'm sorry, there was a fire in Flans-Tayan City just now. I was distracted for a moment." "Yes, it's fine." Although Lianping took the initiative to explain, for some reason, Anna felt that his distraction wasn't that simple. The intimate atmosphere also disappeared because of Lianping's retreat, but the distance between Anna and Lianping had completely disappeared. She tried to find a topic to talk about. "Yesterday the news said about the White Land. Is it true?" "Yes." Lianping nodded. Recently, he had gradually announced the existence of the White Land to the entire human race through various major media channels. However, in the news, the White Land was just an accident related to the spatial door experiment. The so-called demons and magic stars hadn't been announced yet. If these things were announced too early, it would easily cause panic. Therefore, Lianping only spread some rumors to let the humans slowly accept this fact. When the overall strength of the human race had developed to a certain extent and they had strong confidence, he would truly announce this news to everyone. "You know about the demons, right?" Lianping glanced at Anna and said, "Yes." Anna nodded. She thought about the information regarding the demons and still felt astonished. "Lord Wang Chong told me about it. It feels like a legend. Do you think we'll be able to go against them 1 year later?" "Don't worry." Lianping revealed a smile and said calmly, "As long as I'm around, no one will be able to destroy Earth." Just then, the maid at the side walked up once again, seeming to want to report something. However, Lianping only shook his head. The maid did not say anything and started to serve the dishes. Xiao Xuesu should have been by Lianping's side, but she seemed to know that Anna wasn't used to having multiple wives and concubines. In order to prevent awkwardness, she did not come over. After dinner, Lianping personally sent Anna out of the palace. Looking at her departing back view, his disposition changed. There seemed to be waves of cold air seeping out. The warm and gentle aura had completely disappeared. With a flash, he disappeared from Earth and arrived on the land of the magical star. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Mobile phone users, please read it at M. Chapter 405. On the continent of Mondo, the conflict between the Earth's army and the local army was getting more and more intense. After Holy Roland and Wiseman were occupied one after another, the only sorcerer Marshal Isa left the Fago Empire with 20 sorcerers after witnessing Lianping's power with his own eyes and pledged allegiance to the Earth's army. The remaining 3 empires, including the Fago Empire, finally realized the crisis of the situation. They completely stopped the internal strife between countries and between the higher-ups, and truly united together. More than 10 million soldiers, 600 sorcerers, and even more than 200 giant dragons rushed over to join the army against the evil gods. Lianping had been completely described as an unpardonable evil god in all the places that had not been occupied by the Earth's army. Starting from the border between Holy Roland and Wiseman, the battle line that spread for thousands of kilometers seemed to have burned the entire continent of Mondo. After the Magic Alliance suffered great losses in several head-on clashes, they immediately changed their battle strategy. In the past, ordinary soldiers would charge head-on while the sorcerers would release magic from the rear. Now, they were fighting against the powerful firepower of the Earth's army. The soldiers became the cannon fodder to attract the firepower, while the special forces formed by the sorcerers took the opportunity to sneak in, execute beheadings, and wantonly destroy the various weapons of the Earth's army. Some of the sorcerers also tried to study the principles of the weapons after seizing the weapons of the Earth's army. However, due to the serious lack of scientific knowledge, they could only use some simple firearms at most. At first, such a guerrilla tactic was successful, but soon the Earth's army concentrated their forces. Most of the units were loaded onto the floating aircraft carriers. The plasma shields on the carriers were activated by the antimatter engines, which were not something that the sorcerers could break. After the complete failure of the head-on battle, the sorcerers of the Magic Alliance could only rely on prophecy magic to constantly attack the weak points where the floating aircraft carriers were not. However, this was led by Xinghe personally. In front of the rapid response force that fought through the warp gates, after a few successful attempts, it was difficult to be effective again. The cities that were occupied by the Earth's army were all set up with warp gate. In addition, there were hundreds of spy satellites orbiting the atmosphere of the magic planet. These warp gates were like nails, firmly stabilizing the territory occupied by the Earth's army. The magic shooters might be able to circle around to the rear of the Earth army through the portal, but as long as they were in an important battle position or even launched an attack on a certain large town, they would be annihilated by the rapid reaction force that would rush over through the portal. Thus, after learning of the existence of the warp gate, the most important task for the mages before attacking a stronghold was to have some mages who were proficient in shapeshifting and charm humans sneak into the enemy's base and wait for an opportunity to destroy the warp gate and prevent the reinforcement of the rapid response team. In this way, countless sorcerers led the superior mages and inferior mages to form hundreds of mobile combat teams. All of them circled to the rear of the enemy and began to recapture or destroy the positions occupied by the Earth army. However, as long as they could not compete with the 6 aircraft carriers and by Xinghe in a head-on battle, such guerrilla warfare could only buy them more time. Due to the scattering of the magic shooters, they were even more defenseless against the team led by Xinghe. As the sorcerers fighting in the enemy's rear were captured and killed one by one, the disadvantage of the Allied forces grew. Finally, today, the capital cities of the remaining 3 empires were all breached, and the entire Mondo continent was engulfed in the flames of war. The 6 aircraft carriers gathered once again. 10 kilometers away from them was the number 1 fortress of the Mondo continent, which had 500,000 soldiers and more than 400 magic shooters. Behind it was the headquarters of the Mondo continent's Mage Guild. Once that was captured, it would be an unprecedented blow to the entire magic allied forces. Thus, despite knowing the strength of the Earth army, countless magic shooters still rushed over, swearing to stop the invasion of the evil gods even at the cost of their lives. In the sky, hundreds of dragons pounced toward the location of the aircraft carriers. Their powerful strength and magic gave them the speed of a fighter jet. However, what awaited them were hundreds of interceptors the size of small cars. Seeing these little fellows that were less than one-fifth their size flying around like bees, a hint of wariness appeared in the eyes of the dragons. A dragon roar sounded. Through the telepathic connection, the orders of the Allied forces commander reached the ears of every dragon. Ignore those little boxes. Pay attention to intercepting the iron birds. The little boxes naturally referred to the interceptors, and the iron birds were the fighter jet. After many battles, the higher-ups of the Allied forces already knew that the interceptors could only shoot a type of blue light. It was powerful against the air, but it was not much of a threat to the ground troops. The iron rods, iron balls, and so on released by the iron birds were a great threat to the construction works and the ground troop. They saw the dragons collide with the torrent of interceptors. Countless blue pulse rays hit the scales of the dragons. 1 or 2 shots might not be a problem, but after dozens or hundreds of shots, even the strongest dragon's scales would melt. Almost every second, there would be a dragon wailing and falling to the ground. However, there were also more interceptors that were crushed, smashed, or destroyed by the flames or magic of the dragons, turning into wreckage on the ground. However, every dragon was a life that took hundreds or even thousands of years to form. As for those unmanned interceptors that were only controlled by computers, any production line on Earth could build 5 to 6 interceptors in a day. This was an unfair exchange, but the dragons could do nothing about it. Seeing that the dragons had temporarily blocked the enemy's aerial attacks, the sorcerers in the fortress immediately started casting spells according to the plan. As terrifying magic waves rose, the entire sky was illuminated by dark clouds. Sibelius shouted into the communicator, "It's a level 10 destruction spell, Glory of Thunder. At least 100 sorcerers are casting it together. I'm not sure if the floating aircraft carriers can withstand this spell." Bai Xinghe nodded and ordered, "Activate all plasma shields at full power. Fang Yuhuang, help defend against this spell." Fang Yuhuang had been cultivating for a long time and absorbing the insights of the Queen of Heaven. Although he did not break through to the 6th energy level like Xia Laikong, he had reached the peak of the 5th energy level, just like Bai Xinghe. Now, his 33 paradises had also reached the 27th paradises. Following Bai Xinghe's order, the sky above the 6 floating aircraft carriers was completely covered by a layer of distorted space. It was only 1 meter thick, but it had become a world's end with a depth of over 140,000 kilometers. A white light flashed in the sky, and in the next moment, countless thunderbolts came crashing down like pillars of light, as if they had violated the laws of nature. Each of the tens of thousands of pillars of light contained a high temperature of over 10,000 degrees Celsius. The electricity contained within them was enough to supply an entire city with electricity for an entire year. If the 6 floating aircraft carriers only had plasma shields, it would be difficult to ensure that they would remain undamaged even if these tens of thousands of thunderbolts came crashing down. However, due to Fang Yuhuang's presence, these thunderbolts had already traversed 140,000 kilometers of space in just 1 or 2 seconds before they came crashing down. Unlike light, thunderbolts had to expend a lot of energy to travel through the atmosphere. After traversing 140,000 kilometers, most of the thunderbolts had disappeared without a trace. Only a small portion of them bombarded the plasma shields of the floating aircraft carriers, causing ripples. Looking at the scene before them, the Earth's army was naturally cheering, while the Magic Alliance's army was in despair. Fire! Following Bai Xinghe's order, the railguns, Gaussian cannons, plasma cannons, laser cannons, and other weapons on the floating aircraft carriers were all aimed in the direction of the fortress. In just 5 minutes, the strategic magic barrier that enveloped the entire fortress was already on the verge of collapse. However, at this moment, a few more beams of starlight flashed in the sky. Huge pillars of light that were dozens of meters thick directly penetrated the defensive layer set up by Fang Yuhuang and then bombarded the plasma shields without any hindrance. It's laser weapons! They're coming from outside the atmosphere. There's more. Following the exclamations in the command room, another 5 beams of laser light bombarded the 5 floating aircraft carriers. The plasma shield powered by the antimatter engine only lasted for 10 seconds before it was penetrated by the terrifying laser beam. The 6 aircraft carriers were pierced with a huge hole in their hull. Then, in a series of explosions, billowing smoke, they fell to the ground. At the same time when the floating aircraft carriers were hit, the ground around them was already shrouded by countless pillars of light, plowing the earth fiercely. All the animals, trees, rivers, and hills on the ground were all vaporized by the endless high temperature. Seeing that the floating aircraft carriers had fallen to the ground, everyone in the fortress yelled loudly. It's Demigod! It's Lord Dionysus! Kill all these demons! Without the threat of the floating aircraft carriers, the 500,000 soldiers in the fortress poured out in full force. The sorcerers who had consumed a lot of their magic power to cast level 10 spells also used their own methods to recover and followed closely behind. On the other hand, the Earth's army suffered heavy losses due to the crash of the floating aircraft carriers. Most of the ordinary soldiers were directly killed by the fall. As for the ability users, except for people at the level of Bai Xinghe and Xia Likong, most of the survivors were injured. Most of the weapon systems of the floating aircraft carriers had also been destroyed during the crash. Only a few of them were still operational, but due to the location of the crash, only a few of them were aimed in the direction of the fortress. Faced with the surging magic army in such a state, Bai Xinghe and the others all had grave looks in their eyes. Even if they could win in such a state, it would probably be a Pyrrhic victory. The natives who had submitted to the military force of the Earth's army and been conquered and taken in could also very likely break out into chaos again because of this. Right at this moment, a white light flashed across the sky, and Li Anping's figure appeared before the hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the fortress. When he raised his head and looked at the sky, countless data and formulas flashed through his mind. His eyes directly used infrared observation to traverse a distance of several thousand kilometers and saw a certain spot in outer space. However, there was nothing there now. Using the spatial gate to relay the high-energy laser to achieve ultra-long distance attacks from light-years away? Location of the main body unknown. At the same time, Li Anping did not need to turn his head. All the data within a 10-kilometer radius had been collected in his mind. Are the attacks near here to prevent the shots from missing? There's the aura of prophecy magic. Even lightspeed attacks require the assistance of prophecy magic. It seems that he's hidden further away than I thought. Just as Li Anping arrived, the army of hundreds of thousands had already charged toward the Earth's army like a torrent. The soldiers at the forefront only saw a blur before their eyes, and then they saw Li Anping standing alone before them. Without much thought, these soldiers had already raised the large swords in their hands and slashed viciously toward Li Anping. Chapter 406. Just as this soldier slashed the top of Li Anping's head, the surface of Li Anping's entire body changed. With the diameter of one atom as the thickness, countless atoms were squeezed together by the strong interaction force. 50 atoms were forcibly stuffed into the position where there was only one atom. They covered Li Anping's entire body in an orderly manner, forming a structure similar to adamantium alloy. However, regardless of whether it was in terms of strength or hardness, it far surpassed the original adamantium alloy. From the outside, Li Anping's entire body seemed to be covered by a layer of silver metal. When the soldier slashed his head with his sword, he felt as if he had slashed a mountain. The powerful reaction force caused the web between his thumb and forefinger to crack. Then, the other soldiers behind him also crashed toward Li Anping's position like wave. However, a force field rose behind Li Anping. The force field was like an invisible barrier, and the soldiers who were charging like waves crashed into the force field. The scene was like a piece of tofu crashing into a wall. The soldiers in the first row had their bones broken from the impact. However, before they could cry out in pain, the soldiers in the back row had already crashed into them, twisting their bodies into various shapes. Due to the transparent force field, the soldiers in the back had no idea what was going on in front of them. They could only keep charging, causing all kinds of trampling, crashing, and other situations. The entire Alliance army's charging formation was instantly blocked. This was also Li Anping's goal. He had calculated that Dionysus's attack method was to relay the attacks through multiple spatial gates. In other words, through several spatial gates that had been opened in advance, the laser would pass through these spatial gates to achieve an ultra-long-distance supraluminal attack. Under such circumstances, even Li Anping would not be able to accurately pinpoint Dionysus's location. When he came to this conclusion, he made an appropriate response for three purposes. The first was to eliminate the army in front of him. The second was to eliminate them slowly, giving Dionysus some time to think. He wanted to see if Dionysus would be able to hold himself back. This force could be said to be the last large-scale resistance force on the entire Mondo continent. Once this force disappeared, there would no longer be any forces on the entire Mondo continent that could resist Earth's military. However, judging from Dionysus' character, Li Anping was sure that Dionysus wouldn't come to his aid. In his heart, perhaps the entire Mondo continent was not as important as him. Third, it was to test out Li Anping's new idea. It was the force field armor he had created by changing the strong interaction force and the arrangement of atoms. As humans continued to develop in the White Land and the original universe, the situation they would encounter in the future would definitely become more and more dangerous, and their enemies would also become more and more powerful. Many of the weapons that were still in use would gradually fall behind the times. Therefore, Li Anping designed many new weapons. The force field armor on the surface of his body was one of them. In the future, it might be replaced with exoskeleton armor in the form of exoskeleton armor. Li Anping, who was surrounded by the crowd, punched out. His fist had already pierced through several tens of soldiers, leaving behind rows of bloody mist. After the punch, Li Anping stood still. With the increase of the strong interaction force, the arrangement of atoms on the surface of his body changed again, and the density between them increased again. The strength has increased again, the friction coefficient has also decreased, and the light reflection ability has been enhanced. At this moment, the soldiers at the side roared and charged forward again, slashing toward Li Anping with their swords. However, as Li Anping pointed out with his finger covered by the force field armor was like an indestructible blade. It severed the soldiers' weapons, arms, and bodies, turning them into a pile of minced meat. As long as the strong interaction force keeps increasing until electrons are abandoned and the armor is purely made of neutrons and protons, the entire planet will be nothing more than a piece of glass for the person wearing the armor. A single charge will be enough to pierce through the entire planet. And in this case, the proton and the seed will stop moving completely, just like a large atomic nucleus. Conventional attacks will be completely ineffective. However, using this kind of armor requires a force field to be maintained all the time. The stronger the armor, the more energy it requires. While thinking of this, Li Anping's body floated half a meter off the ground. Then with a dash, his body was like a sharp blade, slicing open a huge hole in the countless soldiers. Compared to Li Anping's current skin, the soldiers' armor and bodies were like tofu compared to a steel plate. The result of a steel plate falling into a bucket of tofu was the same as the result of Li Anping crashing into the group of soldiers. Wherever he passed by, he would only leave behind clouds of blood mist and pieces of flesh. Regardless of whether it was blades, spears, staffs, or all sorts of destructive spells, none of them were able to leave a single mark on Li Anping's body. Li Anping's means of attack were also very simple. He relied purely on the indestructible force field armor to continuously penetrate the enemy's formation, smashing them into pieces one after another. Li Anping was like a beam of silver light, constantly shuttling through the crowd. It was as if he was harvesting leeks, continuously reaping the lives of the native soldiers in large swathes. This was the result of him restraining his speed and strength as much as possible, slowly killing the soldiers. With a boom, a fireball the size of a car directly bombarded Li Anping's position. The terrifyingly high temperature directly affected the area within a radius of 10 meters, like a high-explosive bomb. The explosive air currents produced sent all the surrounding soldiers flying. However, Li Anping seemed to have no reaction at all as he walked out of the waves of fire. The high temperature, which was enough to melt steel plates, was now like a cool breeze, faintly brushing past his body without leaving a single mark. The archmages in the back looked at Li Anping, who was constantly killing, and said angrily, "Hurry and stop him." Fireballs, ice arrows, lightning, and all kinds of offensive spells were launched toward Li Anping's position. In order to test the performance of the force field armor, Li Anping did not use any method to counteract these attacks. He directly used the force field armor on his skin to resist all the spells released by the other party. However, he was like a reef by the sea. No matter what kind of magical torrent he faced, let alone injure him, they could not even make him take a step back. Looking at the silver specter that was like a machine, silently reaping the lives of the allied soldiers, all the archmages revealed looks of fear. In just a few minutes, the continuous massacre had already left over 5,000 corpses on the ground. However, Li Anping still did not stop, and kept repeating the same actions. He dashed to and fro in the crowd, knocking the soldiers into pieces one by one. His actions also caused the mages in the back to become more and more frenzied. They even completely disregarded the safety of the soldiers in front and began to cast all kinds of high-level spells. Huge meteorites smashed onto Li Anping's body, and he broke out of the rocks directly. The ultra-low temperature of -200 degrees Celsius covered Li Anping's body, but it could not penetrate the protection of the force field armor at all. The thunderbolts that descended from the sky directly melted the earth, but they could not leave a single trace on Li Anping's skin. The various curses of necromancy, rays, and attacks of negative energy were the few things that could affect the force field armor. Ordinary physical attacks are completely ineffective. However, other means are needed to defend against radiation, rays, and other types of attacks. However, the defensive effect of physical attacks is already passable. It can also adjust the defensive strength of the force field armor according to the amount of energy output. When there were more than 50,000 corpses, and blood stained the entire ground red, the crazy massacre finally aroused fear in the people. However, when some of them wanted to escape, they realized that an invisible force field had already enveloped the entire battlefield like a cage. Faced with the unstoppable demon in front of them, feelings of despair finally spread among the allied forces. 2 hours later, until Li Anping crushed the head of the last archmage, Dionysus still did not appear. Although it was as he had expected, Li Anping still revealed a sneer at the corners of his lips. Chapter 407. In the Battle of the Stronghold, the strongest resistance force in the Mondo continent was destroyed. The Mage Guild was taken over by the Earth's army. Countless materials, books, and materials related to magic were taken over by the army. There was also a group of mages who had escaped with their outstanding mage apprentices before the war to preserve the fire of the Mage Guild. They were all wanted by the Earth's military. As the result of the Battle of the Stronghold spread out, the entire continent was shaken again. Countless mages called this day the end of magic. Countless of originally scattered resistance forces had given up all resistance after knowing that the Mage Guild had also been defeated. Only a few stubborn ones still persisted in resistance. However, under the encirclement of the Earth's army, their defeat was only a matter of time. In terms of the overall situation, the entire Mondo continent was completely unified by the Earth's army. In the southwest of the Mondo continent, in a medium-sized city called Corinth, Walt and more than 10 soldiers were following behind a soldier wearing nano-armor. They walked towards the square in the center of the city. Because of the Earth's army's rule and propaganda, at least now in public, no one dared to call the Earth's soldiers the Silver Demons again. Instead, they called them the Sky Guards, the guards from the Celestial Realm and the Celestial Realm. Although there were still occasional incidents of local natives attacking Earth soldiers, for most of the ordinary people, their lives after the war were much better than before because of the huge amount of food provided by Earth, coupled with their modified low tax rates, and the soon-to-be universal magic education. This made many poor people have more faith in the legendary king of the Celestial Realm, Li Anping. Walt followed behind the Sky Guard and looked at the surrounding poor people who looked at them with fear, envy, and jealousy. He couldn't help but feel a little proud. He didn't expect that the matter of him surrendering to the Earth's army with extreme reluctance would become the best thing he had done in his life. However, every time this happened, he would always think of Ed. He was the one who gave the position of squad leader to Ed. Thinking about how the Celestial Realm had unified all the native armies into security forces, and how Ed had become a high-ranking security officer, he regretted giving up the position of squad leader. At this moment, the Heavenly Guard stopped and placed the huge instruments on his back on the ground. They were 2 strange cubes. After placing them on the ground, the Heavenly Guard pressed a few buttons on their surfaces. After a series of transformations, one of the instruments began to emit light, while the other began to spit out clouds. Although the Heavenly Guards did not say anything, just the Heavenly Guards themselves and the 2 strange-looking machines were enough to pique the curiosity of the natives. As more and more people gathered around, Walt and his companions became vigilant, standing around to prevent the crowd from getting too close to the Heavenly Guards and the 2 instruments. What is that? He is exhaling. Maybe it's a divine beast from the heaven realm. The fact that it's breathing means that it's breathing. The other thing that's emitting light should be its eyes. The commoners were in a heated discussion. 2 people in long robes looked warily at the Heavenly Guards and instruments in the square. They were members of the Anti-Demon Alliance, a force established by the remaining magicians who were still resisting the rule of Earth. Both of them were magicians who had recently escaped to the city of Corinth due to the pursuit of ability users. One of the younger magicians asked, "There's only one Heavenly Guard. Should we attack?" The older magician shook his head. "Don't alert the enemy. We haven't been here for long. Don't attract the attention of those lackeys." The lackeys he was talking about were naturally the ability users from Earth, who were in charge of encircling and suppressing the magicians. The younger magician nodded, but his eyes were still filled with hatred when he looked at the Heavenly Guards. He clearly remembered how his teachers, seniors, and classmates died under the enemy's cannon fire. He would always remember the day when the headquarters of the Association of Magicians was breached. Many magicians who were more powerful than him chose to commit suicide out of despair. The younger magician said fiercely, "What do you think they want?" "I don't know." The older magician shook his head. What the 2 magicians did not know was that while they were observing the actions of the Heavenly Guards, there were soldiers from Earth doing the same thing in all the large and medium-sized cities on the continent. If the association of magicians was the holy land in the hearts of all the magicians on the Mondo continent and the spiritual symbol of all the magicians, then the demigod Dionysus was the saint in the hearts of all the magicians on the Mondo continent. He was another spiritual symbol. The destruction of the association of magicians' headquarters caused a large number of magicians to give up resistance. Among the remaining magicians who were still resisting, except for a few who were mentally tough and indomitable, most of them relied on their expectations of Dionysus to persist. They believed that as long as His Excellency Dionysus appeared again, he would be able to lead them to defeat the demons and rule the world with magic again. Under all kinds of gazes, the soldiers from Earth slowly operated the instruments on the ground. These two instruments were a projection system and an air screen system. They were specially designed by Li Anping for the upcoming actions of the Magic Continent. The projection system could be connected to the cameras that were shooting in the distance through the satellite. However, here, the signals sent by Li Anping were received directly through the satellite. He projected the image of Li Anping's surroundings. The air screen system, on the other hand, used an electronic and thermodynamic system to suck in air, convert its imaging characteristics, and then release it to create a large range of water vapor fog wall. Using the principle of mirage imaging and the imbalance of molecular vibrations between the fog wall and the air, a specific image was formed. A few minutes later, the huge air screen was assembled in the sky. With the flash of the projection system, Li Anping's figure appeared directly in the sky. Almost all the citizens of Clorin could see Li Anping's figure clearly in the sky. Behind him was a boundless void and a dark gray land. All the citizens looked at the unique image in the sky curiously and in surprise, guessing the identity of the man in the image. The same thing happened in all the large and medium-sized cities in the whole continent of Mondo. In addition to countless civilians who heard the news and walked out of their houses to look at the sky, countless mages, whether they had surrendered to the Earth Army or insisted on resisting the Earth Army, all looked at Li Anping who appeared in the sky. They all vaguely guessed that the other party might have made some big moves again. The old mage hiding in the crowd of Clorin frowned and said, "It seems to be an image formed by some kind of water vapor. It feels a bit like a mirage." The young mage nodded and said, "I didn't feel the magic elements either. Is it the technology of the divine realm again?" Because the technological level of the Earth was too far ahead of the continent of Mondo. Therefore, although the mages of the continent of Mondo had seized and studied weapons and equipment from the Earth many times, the results were not great. In particular, the principles of these equipment were too broad, and they also had various advanced authorization systems, network systems, and DNA systems to manage. Many instruments were used well by the people of the Earth, but they could not be used in the hands of the mages. Some mages thought that if they wanted to defeat the demons, it was important to learn their strengths and technique. However, some mages thought that all technological products were magic that belonged to the Silver Devils, and that they were a type of magic in essence, but only the Silver Devils could use this kind of magic. The old mage did not think so. He had always thought that the demons' weapons were similar to alchemy products, and that they were things that everyone could use. However, there was some secret that they had not discovered. Perhaps this was the key to defeating the demons. Just as everyone was talking and watching, Li Anping confirmed that all the projection systems and air screens were working properly and began to speak. He used the common language of the continent of Mondo. With Li Anping's computing ability, he naturally did not need to use language proficiency spells to grasp this language in an instant. Listening to his accent, it was no different from the locals who had spoken the common language for more than 10 years. Li Anping's voice was directly transmitted through the sound system below the projection system. Countless loudspeakers installed by the Earth Army in advance also began to broadcast his voice. These loudspeakers were originally installed by the Earth Army to better educate and rule the continent of Mondo, and to publicize some deeds of the divine realm or some basic enlightenment education. Now it also spread Li Anping's voice to every corner of the city. The place that appears in the image is Mobi 2 above your head, which is the Netera you speak of. One of the moons of the magic star. I am Li Anping, your ruler. When Li Anping finished this sentence, there was a burst of exclamations in all the cities of Mondo. The mages hidden in the crowd looked at the expressionless Li Anping in the image with fear and hatred. It's the king of the gods. The ruler of the world, please forgive our ignorance. You're our master. In the square of Clorin, countless believers who had now believed in Li Anping were the first to kneel down. Of course, whether they really believed in him or were afraid, or had received the communication from the Earth Army in advance, it was unknown. In short, as they took the lead to kneel down, the Nanosoldier Alliance and security forces also knelt down. Then, when the other civilians saw this, they could only kneel down. Only a small number of people who were far away from the projection system and not near the square had the opportunity to not kneel. The older mage also knelt down. He pulled the young mage beside him and said, "Kneel down first, don't attract too much attention." The young mage looked at the sky stubbornly, but when he saw the people around him gradually kneel down, and finally he was the only one standing on the ground. When even the heavenly guards looked over, he sighed and cursed the evil god in his heart, and finally knelt down on the ground. Everyone looked at the sky and listened to Li Anping's voice as he continued, "I will bring you a life without worries, and give everyone the opportunity to receive an education. Although the continent of Mondo still has inequality, it will be at least 100 times fairer than before. But among you, there are still some who want to go back to the past and live under that rotten rule, deceiving people with lies." The young mage looked at Li Anping fiercely in the sky, wishing that he could go over and defeat Li Anping right now and then trample him under his feet. However, he knew that he couldn't do it because the difference in strength between the two was too great. So, he held back the anger in his heart and continued to listen to the other party. "Dionysus, I know that you can see me now and hear what I'm saying. 10 days. I'll live stream here and wait for you for 10 days. I'll give you a chance to compete with me fairly. Of course, if there are others who also want to challenge me, they can come over. I'll wait for you here." After hearing Li Anping's words, the older mage's heart sank. If no one could defeat Li Anping's deterioration in these 10 days, and if even Sir Dionysus failed and didn't show up, he couldn't imagine how heavy a blow it would be to the mages of the entire continent. On the other hand, the young mage beside him was full of excitement and began to look forward to the battle between the two. Chapter 408. During these 10 days, Li Anping stood silently on the second moon of the magic star, which was called Netera by the locals. The distance from the Mondo continent to Netera was enough to make most magic shooters despair. In other words, among the mages on the Mondo continent, there were no more than 3 who had the ability to stand in front of Li Anping if they wanted to challenge Li Anping. However, during these 10 days, no one stood in front of Li Anping and challenged him. During these 10 days, Li Anping's image covered the sky of the Mondo continent, giving the mages an extremely oppressive feeling. The confidence that came from thousands of years of magic civilization was completely suppressed by Li Anping at this moment. In the beginning, there were still countless mages who were looking forward to the demigod Dionysus teaching Li Anping a lesson in front of everyone. However, as time went by and the influence of Dionysus' absence, the confidence of all the mages was constantly eroded. That was exactly Li Anping's goal. He wanted to completely defeat the mages on the Mondo continent mentally. Of course, it would be best if Dionysus could be lured out. On the aircraft carrier that Li Anping had repaired personally, not only was the original damage completely repaired by Li Anping, but Li Anping had also installed the force field armor that he had just tested. It could increase or decrease the energy output according to different situations, and change the strength of the armor, which greatly improved the defense of the aircraft carrier. In the command room, Xia Likong looked at Li Anping in the image, and asked the adjutant beside him, "How long until the 10 days are up?" 2 more hours, sir." Xia Likong nodded and suddenly asked, "Do you think Dionysus will come?" Golden Light, who was sitting on a chair, said, "After fighting for so long on the Mondo continent, he only dared to launch a sneak attack from afar. I think he won't dare to come." Yanbei said calmly, "If he doesn't show up this time, he won't have another chance." On the other side, Bai Xinghe, who had been sitting cross-legged on the ground without giving up a single second of training, suddenly stood up. A mouthful of white air spurted out of his mouth. In the eyes of Xia Likong and the rest of them, 720 black holes seemed to be rising from his body. Even the light around him seemed to be twisted. Jin Guang glanced at Bai Xinghe, who was standing on his feet, with interest flashing in his eyes. Right now, other than Yanbei, Bai Xinghe, the only one who had reached the 6th level, was the opponent he wanted to challenge the most. This was especially so after he stopped concealing the power of the 720 aperture acupoint. The energy gushing out from every part of his body was like several hundred active volcanoes. It was as if they could erupt with a power that could destroy the world at any moment. As for Li Anping, Jin Guang had once dreamed of surpassing him. However, after seeing the current Li Anping, such thoughts were completely gone. That was already a violation of the rules of the game and could be considered a bug. As long as Jin Guang's brain was not damaged, he would not have the slightest thought of challenging him. Bai Xinghe stood up and said, "If I were Dionysus, I wouldn't come here to seek death. I would leave this galaxy and find a place where His Majesty would never be able to find me. I would live my life there." "Oh, old Bai, this is not like you. You have no fighting spirit at all," Xia Likong joked. "It's not a matter of fighting spirit," Bai Xinghe said calmly. "In front of His Majesty, the so-called determination, talent, and hard work are all meaningless," Bai Xinghe said casually. "Such strength is beyond the imagination of human beings. It's like ants cannot affect the sun no matter how hard they try. They are not in the same dimension at all." Yanbei frowned. "Although His Majesty is very strong, isn't it too exaggerated to say that? You don't understand." Bai Xinghe looked at Li Anping in the image, and revealed a hint of fear. "When you become stronger, you will realize that His Majesty's improvement every day is far greater than the total combat ability of the 5 of us combined. The difference between addition and subtraction is not enough to describe it." Hearing Bai Xinghe's words, the 4 of them were all surprised and did not know what to say. At this moment, the entire aircraft carrier suddenly shook. Bai Xinghe was the first to react. Looking at the image in the sky, he said, "He really came. In many cities on the continent of Mondo, both the sorcerers who had surrendered and the sorcerers who were still resisting. The past 10 days were the longest 10 days of their lives. Thousands of sorcerers flooded into the cities and looked at the image in the sky, looking forward to Dionysus' arrival. They had been full of expectation at the beginning, but now they were deeply disappointed. 10 days were about to pass, and Dionysus was still nowhere to be seen. Their hearts became heavier and heavier. In the square of Krolin, the young sorcerer disguised himself as a vendor and had watched the live broadcast for 10 days. Even though it was the same image every day, even though Dionysus never appeared, he still continued to watch it. However, at this moment, the young sorcerer clenched his fists tightly. He had been learning magic since he was a child, and all his ideas seemed to have become so ridiculous. Seeing how frustrated he was, the middle-aged sorcerer next to him said, "The first requirement for a sorcerer is to be calm and rational. A sorcerer without rationality and calmness is not a qualified sorcerer. Mr. Dionysus did not come, which means that he is very powerful. With the power of a lord, we should not make meaningless sacrifices. Patience, accumulation, secretly accumulating power, and waiting for an opportunity. That is what we should do. I know. The young sorcerer's voice was somewhat low. I understand what you're saying. However, if even Mr. Dionysus cannot defeat the enemy, can we? Can we really defeat those evil beings with magic alone? Even if we endure for 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years, will we really have a chance to defeat them? Sensing that the young sorcerer had lost confidence in magic, the middle-aged sorcerer did not know what to say for a moment. Even though what he said seemed to make sense, even he had somewhat lost confidence in magic when Dionysus did not appear. Just as the two of them fell silent, the entire earth suddenly began to tremble continuously. Looking up, they discovered that the sky of the entire Mondo continent seemed to have been covered by a layer of shadow at some point. Li Anping stood quietly on the surface of Magic Star Satellite Number 2. This satellite was somewhat similar to the Moon. Due to its small size and mass, its gravity was very weak, and it could not form an atmosphere. It also caused a large loss of air. The entire surface was similar to space, and it could not create an environment suitable for life. During the 10 days of waiting, Li Anping had been keeping in touch with the Earth military through the satellite on Magic Star. He had also kept in touch with Earth through the satellite, the network of the Amara Basin, the network of the White Land Base, the network of the space station, and the network of the Moon Base. Originally, Li Anping thought that Dionysus had given up everything on the Mondo continent and would not appear. However, he did not expect that in the last 2 hours before the 10 days were about to expire, Dionysus would appear in a state that was far beyond his expectations. A huge body appeared in the direction of the sunlight, and a huge shadow shrouded Magic Star Number 2 and the Mondo continent one after another, as if night had fallen. It was a huge object that was 1/3 the size of Magic Star, but its appearance was not the spherical or elliptical body of an ordinary planet. From Li Anping's point of view, it was an image of Dionysus that had been magnified tens of millions of times. However, this giant's body had 4 more arms, making it a total of 6 arms. In addition, behind his head, there was a huge halo that emitted a colorful light. No matter how strong this giant was, just this size alone was enough to cause amazing destructive power. As he approached, the entire Mondo continent changed its course under the huge gravitational force. The rivers changed their course, the seas surged, the mountains trembled, and the magnetic field began to be affected. It could be said that even if this giant did nothing and just landed on the Mondo continent, it would be enough to completely destroy the entire continent's ecosystem and cause an unprecedented disaster. If he could exhale, he could create hurricanes like the Great Red Spot on Jupiter and destroy hundreds of countries with a single breath. If he could punch, one punch would be enough to sink the entire Mondo continent into the sea and create a deeper seabed in the sea. The ripples created by the punch would be enough to form tsunamis that were thousands of meters high. Looking at the terrifying giant in front of him, who could destroy the human civilization on the Mondo continent hundreds of times over just by relying on his own existence, a smile of anticipation appeared on Li Anping's face. The size of the opponent's body, the flow of energy, and the molecular structure of every part of the opponent's body were calculated clearly by Li Anping in an instant. However, he still smiled. His mind turned into an electromagnetic signal, sweeping it toward the opponent's body. Dionysus, I didn't expect you to be able to break through the limits of magic in such a short time and create a new power that belongs to you. This thing in front of me has far exceeded the scope of magic. You've really exceeded my expectations. Hearing Li Anping's words, Dionysus let out a cold snort, emitting waves of disdain in his mind. Li Anping, you don't understand at all, you don't understand how powerful I am now. But I'll let you experience it properly. The power that belongs to God. In the next moment, the giant raised one of his arms and smashed it toward Li Anping with a power that could shatter stars. Before the punch arrived, the change in gravitational force alone had caused the orbit of Moon 2 and the magic planet to tilt. In an instant, Li Anping had calculated that if the power of this punch were to hit Moon 2, the entire satellite would be sent crashing toward the magic planet. In an unprecedented collision, the continent would sink, and the surface of the entire planet would be submerged by the sea. The dust that would soar into the sky would be enough to cover the entire sky for more than 100 years. It's not suitable for us to fight near here. While sending this message, Li Anping flashed and appeared right in front of the opponent's fist. Then, he slammed his palm toward the opponent's fist. What level had Li Anping's strength reached? In the past month or so, he had liberated his power through quantum computing. His current combat power was equivalent to 32 times more than a month ago. So, if 32 Li Anping were to unleash their power at the same time, what kind of effect would it cause? It was like an ant trying to shake a tree. To everyone's surprise, the giant's arm came to a standstill. It was like an ant stopping the footsteps of an elephant. In the next moment, in front of Dionysus' eyes, which were filled with shock and anger, the force field covered most of the area. With the giant's fist as the point of effect, a force that was strong enough to move the stars suddenly erupted. The giant let out a furious roar, but it was still unable to stop Li Anping from pushing it back for thousands of kilometers, far away from the location of the magical star. However, Li Anping did not show the slightest hint of complacency on his face. Regardless of size, mass, or size, they were just the basic attributes of the giant in front of him, or even its flaws. Dionysus' true power was still far from erupting. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.